So, good morning, members.
Morning.
Good morning. I know we've got to 9:30, so if we're all assembled and in order, we'll make a start. So, first of all, live streaming. Obviously, we know the live streaming will be recorded, and so members are aware and ready for that. The emergency evacuation is. I don't think we're planning a practice, but if the alarm does go off, it's out onto the lawn at the front in orderly fashion. And apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Christine Robertson, David Hugill, Bob Marley, George de Boer, Arnold Warnican.
Yeah, we have one of them. So, then it was on to the public minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of December last year, which I think you have on page 3. Are we happy to take those to record?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll just go to Keith.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman, just a slight correction from me. I was actually at the last meeting. I'm not recorded on the minutes, so I think it's administrative confusion. It's entirely my fault. I tend not to sign the register of members because I'm not a member, but we'll correct that going forward.
We'll correct that, Keith, and thank you.
I'll make more of a noise as well.
No, well, thank you very much for your attendance and diligence. It's very much appreciated. Did you want to say something, Tom? I see. So, with that correction that we add Keith to the attendance, I'm happy to take those as a record of the meeting. Brilliant. Okay. Then we come on to public question time, which is an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question. I do have a question. I don't see any members of the public here, although I suppose they could be online. Having had a chat with Tom, the question did come in a little bit late, but nonetheless we felt it was right and proper to deal with it if we can, and we think we can. So I'm not sure, Tom, I mean, in the absence of someone to ask the question, shall we take it as read, or shall we read it?
I think probably if we've got people listening online, it'd be appropriate to read the question out.
Okay. Right, so I'll read the question out, and then I'll give our response. I would just say, I mean, the question's relatively personal in nature, but I think that the purpose of our public questions is to have a question and answer to the authority in as much a corporate form as we can. I don't think that public questions is there for asking questions about individuals, really. So as close as we can, it'll be a corporate response on all of our behalves. So the question is from Sharon Sumner. It says, Tim, I'll correct that to Tom. Tom Hines stated at the previous planning meeting that the authority wanted to be a good neighbour to residents of Raymore Gardens Estate. Could the Chair please explain what he sees being a good neighbour entails, and does he consider ignoring our concerns about safety and threatening the NYC Planning Committee with the Planning Inspectorate to rush through a decision is consistent with this statement? So in response, I'll read out the following. So, we are committed to being a good neighbour as we proceed with the development. We have been and remain open to dialogue with local residents to hear their concerns. Prior to submission of the application, we held open sessions in Helmsley on the draft proposal and engaged with residents through the Helmsley Town Council. We have responded to requests for information. We have sought to keep the site tidy prior to any works commencing and will continue to do so in response to concerns of residents. Taking on board residents' feedback, our application changed the configuration of the entrance to parking access to the site. We also have changes to design of the building in response to resident feedback about the use of materials to reflect the local vernacular. The application highlighted a number of amenity improvements, notably creating a surfaced access to Station Road, which have been advocated by residents. We acknowledge that our presence will lead to more traffic on Little Drive. We've proposed a travel plan comprising speed restrictions, encouraging the use of car sharing and active travel as part of our planning application. We will ensure that this is implemented. Safety matters have been considered by the Highways Authority as part of the application, with no concerns raised about the proposals. Residents have raised the possibility of using the old printworks for any fuel storage and ranger activities, so that it is located away from the housing. Taking on board these concerns, we have considered this and intend to reuse part of the old printworks at our depot rather than the development site. You'll see details of that later on today's agenda. So as I would have said, do you have a supplementary question? But obviously, they're not here, so they don't. I'll take that as public questions concluded. So, still all about me, isn't it? Move on. Members are reminded that it is their responsibility to declare the nature of any personal or prejudicial interest, should they have one, and to please make a note of that so that it's easy for the minutes prior to that item being considered. And then on to item 7, we have the appointment of an independent person.
Appropriate, Chair, that I have sent myself at this point, so I'll do that and come back in when you've dealt with this item.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
So we are on page 6 of the agenda, I think. This you, Tom.
Yeah, this is over to me. So members who were with the authority may recall that a couple of years ago we sought to regularise the term of appointment of our independent person under the Localism Act of 2011. Local authorities, including special purpose local authorities, are required to have an independent person to support the authority in upholding good standards and our code of conduct. At the time, we undertook a recruitment exercise to recruit a new independent person, the previous incumbent having served his term of office, and recruited Keith Wilkinson to join with members' approval as the independent person to serve an initial 2-year term. That 2-year term expires in June, just after the annual general meeting. But on the basis that there's no barrier to the authority making a decision early to seek to extend that appointment, myself and Richard, as the monitoring officer, felt it was appropriate to bring a proposal to this authority meeting to take business out of the AGM to seek to extend Keith's term as our independent person for a further 2-year period, starting towards the end of June 2025. So the proposal is to recommend that the Keith's appointment as independent person be extended.
Thanks, Tom. Any questions or comments on that?
Yes, if you need a second, I'm quite happy to second recommendation.
Yeah, if you propose it, I can second it. Or yeah, Janet and then Malcolm.
It was a comment, Chair. It was just to say I think that I approve the recommendation as well, and I think it's really helpful actually to have that continuity for another couple of years, bearing in mind all the business of the national park. So thank you, Chair.
Malcolm.
I'm just going to second it. You're doing a good job.
Yeah. Okay, so proposed by Heather, seconded by Malcolm. Actually, on the comment, I'd just like to say, I think Keith's been exceptional. Actually, we've had independent people along the way, and given he gets no allowance, I don't think. Does he get any travel allowance?
Yeah, he gets travel. Yeah,
he gets his travel. He uses his time for nothing. He comes and keeps an eye on us at most of our meetings, and a couple of times has made us step back and think, which is exactly what he should do. And so I just wonder if in offering or seeking his reappointment for further time, we could find a way of thanking him and complimenting him for his ongoing commitment to us. Do you think that would be appropriate, Tom?
Yeah, I do. I think Keith is very, very pleased with the support he's been able to provide, and if anything, I think would like to feel that he's making a greater contribution. But from my point of view as chief executive, and I know Richard would echo this as well. He's given us some really good and useful counsel as officers, and that's really what we look for from our independent person, to ensure that we uphold good standards in public life. And I think it would be appropriate to thank Keith for his support and contribution, because of that, not only that members see, but also what we see behind the scenes as officers as well.
Okay. Right, we'll find a way of doing that, either a note from me on behalf of members, or yeah. So the recommendation is that we reappoint Keith for a further 2 years, proposed by Heather, seconded by Malcolm. I think that's unanimous. I don't see anyone against that. Brilliant. Could you bring Keith back, please, Richard? Then on to bigger things. At item 8, it is the strategy and business plan milestones for 25-26. It is, I can't remember.
Yeah, so Kate.
I'm sure Richard will tell you.
Kate Clark, who's our relatively new performance management officer, has done a brilliant job in working with officers to pull together the annual milestones for next year. This is something we do every March. We have under the National Park Management Plan, the authority has a strategy and business plan that sets out our contribution towards delivering the management plan, as well as key elements of organisation and corporate development that we want to take forward. We set 5-year objectives for the organisation, then annual milestones that are reviewed every year, some of which, of course, get completed through the course of the 5-year period, some of which arise and become new because circumstances change. And so Kate's done a brilliant job in organising that and bringing that assembly of milestones together from across the officer group. And I'll hand over to Kate to just sort of take you through the paper. We probably won't detail every single milestone because there are a lot of them. Hopefully members have digested them all cover to cover and have got a number of questions. But Kate will kind of draw out the key things, so over to Kate.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, I've just got a short presentation where I'll just go over the highlights of this year's business plan milestones. So as Tom said, the business plan currently runs from 2022 to 2027, and we're now in the 4th year of a 5-year cycle, 2025 to 2026. And we set new milestones each year, and they're approved at the National Park Authority meeting, usually in March every year. We report against progress against the current milestones every 6 months to the National Park Authority meeting, and that will be in December. So some highlights of the 2025-26 milestones are we're going to be delivering 3 different communication campaigns. So they're listed here: community engagement on climate action, landscape scale change, and experience life unplugged. We're going to complete a signage scheme at 9 of our car parks, implement a new retail strategy, undertake an annual staff survey and develop an action plan as a result, develop and deliver a climate action plan, present a business case and seek approval to build the new headquarters, and if approved, commence construction programme this year. Identify our remaining deep peat sites and prioritise for restoration agreements, deliver a species-focused project in Bransdale, deliver a purpose-built dark skies observatory at Danby Lodge, expand green social prescribing into the Tees Valley, revise our volunteering strategy to increase volunteering and engagement, and review the local plan. So over to members now to discuss the milestones for 2025-26. Our recommendation is that members approve the strategy and business plan milestones for 2025-26. Thank you.
First of all, thanks very much indeed for the report, and it's easy to read. There seems a lot, and I'm interested in the knowledge that we know that some things haven't been delivered as we thought. So we've got a little bit of catch up on some things to do. We've got a lot of new things, but there's not a lot of detail about the resources. So there are some lines that say we're going to do this building being an example of it, without corresponding resources. So there are some new activities that will require new resources. So whilst I'm delighted to see what we're going to do, it does feel as though there's still some work to do about saying how are we going to make sure that what's been delayed previously is delivered, and then what's new is going to also be delivered within the envelope that we've got for resources. So if that sounds critical, please could you think of it as quizzical. I'm interested to know how we're going to manage to do all this, because it's great that we're ambitious, it's great we're doing it, but just checking that we're not over stretching ourselves a little with what we have. So thank you, Chairman, that's the question. Long-winded as it was.
I'll probably pick that up. I think it's not long-winded at all. I think it's a perfectly fair point. It's worth noting that those milestones were drawn up prior to the announcement around our budget. So there's a sense check, I think, for all of the directors and officers here in the room about just making sure that we're in a position to be able to deliver those milestones. Some of them, of course, are contingent on us being able to raise funds from other sources, primarily externally funded projects, of which the More Connected project is probably the biggest one. And it goes without saying that, of course, we have to cut our cloth accordingly. But I'm confident that the milestones that you see are proposed there because officers are as confident as they can be prior to the start of a new financial year starting, that they probably would have wanted to make some progress last year, but didn't get round to it this year. I'm confident we will get to it, but circumstances change and things impact you that mean that you can't always get round to that. So yeah, hopefully that's provides the answer that you're looking for.
Heather.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, it is easy to read and awful lot of work to do. This possibly came up like the
Yes, we're quite well advanced with that in terms of what we're doing, but the basic requirement is for us to return to profitability in terms of our retail, and that's what we're doing. So yes.
So you're obviously going to have to try and find out what the customer wants. That must be difficult. Maybe you have to go and do a bit of shopping with an asset class. I don't know, but obviously it is difficult. It's all about costing and getting the right thing. I think I made the point of this. I'm a trustee of a Captain schoolroom, and little pens with quills on cost about £2. All the kids want one. It is difficult. Things change and what people want, what can they afford, and I'm sure you've got a chance. But that's fine. And probably maybe
yes.
have to have a bit of a sale and get rid of some of your stuff.
So we've done a lot of the customer insight, and we're, as I say, we're well advanced in terms of this. So it's now going to be about implementing it in terms of at Danby and at Sutton Bank. And certainly we fully intend to review that quite intensely over the next few months, and we'll report back to members in terms of how it's going.
not because I'm here to sell you a job, but obviously it's nice if we've got things in there which relate to the area rather than, you know, I used to say like, you know, you should have a, you can get a paperwork that looks like Captain Cook's monument sort of thing, something they can relate to rather than just, you know, an item. I think that's what people, the visitors from, oh yeah, that'll remind me or whatever. I think
Yes.
it's always a bit more expensive to do that over tea towel and things like that, but I'm sure you've been through that.
There's a delicate balance between, obviously, we don't want to compete with general retail. They're always going to have bigger buying power, but equally for some of the more bespoke items, some of them have not sold, and it's that thing of clearing them away. And if they're not making a sufficient margin and or turnover, then they'll be going out. It's that thing of we will build things in which relate to our purposes as a national park as much as we can, but fundamentally they've got to sell and they've got to make a profit.
I'm not going to go off, it's not jars of jam, is it?
No.
Thanks very much for that.
Okay.
So, I do have another question. So sitting, scrutiny of health. It's a big part of, I think, obviously, I hope you're getting the support you need from, I mean, obviously, lots of different people, you've got two different lots of CCG boards, you've got one, you know, acting on two different sort of authorities really. Are you getting support from them and what they want and engagement? If you've got any problems, just come back to me. Thank you.
I can probably just pick it over quickly ahead of the sport appreciator. I think we've got a good level of engagement with the public health team in North Yorkshire Council. I think we'd love to get more engagement with the integrated care boards covering the area. The particular recommendation here in terms of next year's milestones is to take the Nature Prescriptions project, which we've delivered in partnership with North York Moors Trust and the RSPB in the last year, into Teesside, partly because when we look at the areas of greatest need from an indices and multiple deprivation point of view, it's in Teesside where the need is greatest, and so we'll need to reach out to primary care networks and community organisations in Teesside to help us with that objective.
We had quite a good recreation and wellbeing forum on the business case for the visitor centres as well. So, I mean, later on, Janet's update will cover that. Who was next? Is it Malcolm?
Thank you, Jay. Just briefly, the last item on this agenda is me reporting back to you on the sort of one-to-one discussions that we've been having as members. And one of the issues that cropped up was what a lot of work there is going on and how do we keep in touch with it all. And I think this report just demonstrates how ambitious we are in doing a huge amount of work within the resources that we've got. So I'll come back to it right at the end.
Jane.
A new target for 25-26 to get 1,200 children from schools in the area, and also to get 90% of children to identify a closer connection to nature. Is this of the 1,200 or is this a separate? I don't quite understand how that works. And who is 90% of these from where? Sorry, just to
Over to Joel, thank you.
try and understand.
As always with milestones, we don't just want to measure sort of inputs and outputs, we want to measure impact as well. So in respect of our engagement with schools, we don't just want to sort of count the numbers, but we do want to be able to understand what impact that has had in terms of using appropriate survey measures. So to answer your question, it is of those that attend an event or an activity that we put on in respect of schools, of which we're saying there will be at least 1,200 that will come through. We hope it will be more. So that's the cohort that would then be surveyed, and we would hope that as a result of that we get this level of 90% saying that they meet that definition.
And will we be, sorry, just to continue it, will this be in sort of coexistence with the current curriculum, or how will you be encouraging these children? Because obviously transport is a major issue, with my governor hat on, is a major issue for schools, particularly post-COVID. So to get them into the landscape is expensive, and a lot of them can't afford it. So unless there is something like a hook of it being part of their curriculum, so how are we going to ensure that we get them there, if you see what I mean, with the funding issues of schools at the moment?
So yes, our outdoor learning offer has a range of activities which schools effectively can choose from in terms of which will relate to various different curricular needs. So it's not just things like geography field trips and equivalent. Most of that is aimed at primary sector as well, because we have had to reduce previously our range in terms of what we're offering. But specifically in terms of transport, and that is a major issue for schools in terms of their ability to get there, we do operate a distinct schools transport budget, and we also have a targeted transport budget. Now, both of those at the moment are being reviewed by an external company called Groundwork North East, who we've identified to look at how we can make that money grow and go further, and to ensure that it's having the impact that it's got, because we want to make sure that we're not just using it to effectively subsidise somebody that could afford to do it, but we are actually targeting it specifically to where if it wasn't for that fund, that engagement wouldn't happen. So we really want some assurance on that. Again, it's about trying to grow that pot as well if we can from other project funding. So as much as possible, we will try and enable transport where there is a distinct case. So particularly looking at things like postcode data. So schools that are in particular areas we want to target.
A key target.
They have priority compared to schools from other areas, for example. There's much more detailed work, as I say, that's going on around this, which I know both the EDI Forum and the Recreation and Wellbeing Forum had sight of when we started this, and there'll then be a report back later in the year. So in terms of tracking this through, I'd encourage you to engage with that as we go through, and I'll happily talk to you as well about how we're doing. We're just about to start that review actually on Wednesday.
Brilliant, thank you.
Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I had 3 questions, but Tom answered one before we came in here about Gromond Car Park, and it's still being looked at between Parks and North Yorkshire Council. The other one James just filled in, but I thought we'd pulled the plug on all money for schools. So I couldn't see how 1,200 pupils were going to get into any activities, to be fair, but we'll see how that one goes. Conservation area appraisals. Now I saw that Gromond Village, as well as Gothland and 2 others, you had down as going to have a conservation area appraisal. Now what does that entail, and is it just an appraisal, or are you going to implement something on the back of that, and is that coming to parish council before you go any further on it?
Morning, members. Yeah, that's one from me, Colin. So, as you'll know, the National Park's got about 40 plus conservation areas that were mostly designated in the sort of 80s and 90s. It's good practice when a local planning authority is designating a conservation area to also undertake a detailed appraisal at the same time. So an appraisal is a document that basically explains why that village, that settlement, warrants conservation area protection. So it sets out what the special characteristics are, how it's different to other villages, and identifies the features that we as a local planning authority need to take into account when we're making planning decisions, but it will also identify areas potentially for, obviously when public funding is in a better place, enhancement of those conservation areas. We are legally required to from time to time look at projects to enhance our built environment through conservation area status? The answer is, unfortunately, it's very resource intensive doing a conservation area appraisal. And at the time, the people undertaking those conservation area designations didn't follow them up with detailed appraisals. I think there's about a third of all our conservation areas that now have those detailed appraisals, and we're just catching up, really. So our Senior Heritage Officer, Annabelle, is currently got a programme of undertaking a certain number of conservation area appraisals each year. She was at Appleton Limors last week with a public meeting. So that's happening, and the second answer is that that is happening in full consultation with local people and the parish council and people that live there, so they can actually not just be consulted but input into that process of identifying why those villages are particularly special.
Is that why they're special or why we don't want it as well?
In terms of designating a new conservation area, absolutely. There's full consultation on whether the people living in that village want that conservation area, are happy with the proposed boundary, or whether they think there shouldn't be one, or indeed whether the boundaries should change. And most local planning authorities, and I think this one is no different, really take that consultation response seriously and potentially would not go ahead with a designation if there was substantial objection to it.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. It was just, we had, was it a heritage one going to go ahead as something that, you know, which they thought was good for Gromit, which we didn't want that one either, to be fair, because there was too much heritage in the village and nothing else would manage after that if that came in. But I take it conservation is actually different to the heritage one.
Yeah, and it must be said, conservation areas aren't about saying this place can't change. It's about actually saying all places change, but we need to be aware of things that change for the better. And as I said, there's a lot of positive benefit in terms of focusing resources into conservation areas. Our historic buildings repair grant scheme, for example, has got a priority for buildings within conservation areas. So I've generally found residents do welcome.
Okay.
Two little points. One detailed point and one general point. On page 29, under objective 20, which is maintaining a strong, viable farming and land management community, I noticed that we've said that maximising the sustainable farming incentive is a part of our objective. As you probably know, the sustainable farming incentive was surprisingly and quite itemably halted until next year. So I wonder how we're going to deal with that. I've seen in writing from DEFRA that they would give 6 weeks' notice before doing that. I mean, others are taking that up, not us. But I just wonder whether, having spent quite a lot of time recently on various different things in the Central Dales and Esk Valley doing stuff with our farmers, I just wonder, you know, whether we really are seen by them as partners in aspiration, like I hope we would be. And I just wonder if there's maybe more we should be doing in tone, if not in action, to try and get a bit closer to what they want for themselves as well as what we want from them, because it all seems to be about you know, delivering nature and climate and place. But if you talk to them about what they want to deliver, I've done quite a bit of that recently. Yes, they want to have that stuff, but they want to have a mix. So the fact that, you know, that pillar of SFI has been taken away from us, what else are we going to talk to them about? I know we have FIFL, but I'm just concerned that I don't think we're as close to their aspirations at the moment as we could be. It's just an observation, really. Go on, Tom.
I'll perhaps respond to that observation. I think it's probably useful just to sort of tease out offline the kind of impressions that you're getting. But again, I referred the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave earlier about the fact these milestones were drawn up prior to announcements being made last week. That said, two things. One, countryside stewardship hasn't been withdrawn, and there is something about how do we work with farmers and landowners across the national park to make best use of the options that are available in a way that delivers for them, but also in a way that delivers our management plan objectives. And importantly, in the context of farming and protected landscapes, I know we focus on the funding here, the grant funding that's available, but for a 2-year period, the advisory element of FIPL was extended as well, with a specific intention that that advisors that are employed through protected landscapes would work alongside farmers to make the best use of options. Now, I still think there's a training need across all 44 protected landscapes around CS and some of the other grant schemes that are available. But I feel really strongly that local advisory element of FIPL is one of the kind of game-changing elements of it that can make best use not just of the very, very small grant funding pot that exists under FIPL, but that wider pot that's worth many more millions of pounds in relation to CS and hopefully, touch wood, SFI when it's reintroduced in 15 months' time, if that remains the intention of government, which seems to be from the announcements they made last week.
Clive and then Jane.
Management Plan 6 and its Objective 21, affordable housing. It's got down there, would like to build at least 100 affordable homes in villages across the national park by 2027. Yet in the milestone, it's got we're going to at least 3 affordable housing schemes, which will produce 30 units by this year, next year. That only leaves 1 year for 70 more. Is that doable?
Yes. I think it's a very, very good question. We know that this target has been slow. It's 20 houses a year. We're doing all we can. Obviously, as a National Park Authority, it's not part of our statutory purposes, so we're not putting masses of funding into this. Very active policy officers who work with the rural housing associations and the housing authority, but we're not the housing authority, so to achieve this we're just the planning authority, but we still do work positively, and you'll know what the barriers are to delivering this. Significant one is the reactions of local communities, but yeah, I am confident, and there are, I keep saying this, but there are 3 schemes that are very close to planning application submissions, and you'll be aware of one of them, community-led housing scheme in Leelholm. We have a scheme almost coming forward at Danby, another one in Robin Hood's Bay, looking at sites now in Hinderwell, and there's planning application on your planning agenda in 2 weeks' time, which will deliver half of our annual target, 10 houses at West Ayton, assuming that is approved. So it's a difficult one, but we're doing all we can.
Jane.
Thank you. That was 90% of what I was going to ask. That was absolutely brilliant. I was just going to add one more little thing in, is we say developer, i.e. big projects. We're in the national parks, we're a farming community, we're a local community, and a lot of these places perhaps have a barn or something that would be able to turn into a local residency occupancy. And I'm just wondering, are we encouraging the sort of the one-off? Because if you get 40 people to do a one-off, well, there's a good chunk of our target. Do you see what I mean? So I'm just sort of saying, are we thinking just in one way, or are we encouraging it as different ways as well?
Yeah, I mean, our local plan policies are, they cover all the elements, all the spatial elements, whether it be barn conversions, rural exception sites, delivery through relatively large-scale open market housing, which we delivered 40% affordable housing here in Helmsley. Unfortunately, we don't have settlements the size of Helmsley elsewhere in the National Park. The Yorkshire Dales do, so they're doing a different approach where they've got what I'd call the Helmsley approach, which is significant housing, and on the back of that market housing, they're getting affordable housing in places like Hawes and Grassington and said, but we don't really have settlements that size. So we mainly focus on rural exception sites, and we have been pretty successful in doing that. There's a little bit of a hiatus at the moment. In terms of barn conversions, our policies are very positive. You know, a landowner will not probably convert a barn to affordable housing because it's not viable.
Local residency. To...
Currently, our policies apply local occupancy conditions to barn conversions. That's a huge area for you to debate in the local plan review, whether you want to continue seeing that or whether you want to think about potentially using principal occupancy as well, principal residence, which makes schemes a little bit more viable than local occupancy. So there's a lot of work there to be done on the local plan review and getting the best policies to deliver that housing.
Thank you.
Okay.
John.
Thank you, Chair. Objective 13. Could I provide an update for colleagues and also a question? The update is on the establishment of the Dark Skies Observatory at Danby Lodge. Just to say briefly, we've got support in the academic environment from Durham University and York University. And we have links to Teesside University. We have the support of the Whitby Astronomical Society, who have been holding dark skies events for some years now, and that's important in terms of manning the observatory. Briefly, what we envisage is school visits, mainly to deliver the national curriculum that school pupils need, regular public observing nights, community groups from the Teesside area and the wider northern area of the park. The application to Wolfson Foundation for the purpose-built observatory looks promising. That's very briefly an update there. The question is on the objective 13, milestone 73. It says to deliver at least 2 additional dark skies friendly community schemes. Could I ask, have those 2 areas been identified, or are we looking to identify them, and could we add some extra ones to that?
I believe certainly one of the locations has been identified. John, I can't confirm on both of them, but perhaps you'll allow us to come back to you separately offline and just confirm with Mike Coulton, who's not with us today.
Okay, members, looking at the time, there's just one more question really. It goes back to Janet's point at the beginning about resources for this. Just remind me, in a rather simplistic form, how this fits together with our, we have our business plan, or is this our business plan? We have what we're going to do with our money. We have the things that we hope to get done one way or another, which I think in our management plan, which this is, and we have our budget. How does all that string together so someone can tell what's going to happen?
So, broadly speaking, you're right. The management plan is a vision and a set of policies and objectives for the place. We are one of the organisations that has agency in terms of the delivery of the management plan, but not sole agency. So we then set a set of objectives that basically define our contribution under the management plan, and we review what we feel we can do on a year-to-year basis through this document, which is the strategy and business plan. Strategy because it's also about defining a trajectory for the organisation, the kind of organisation that we're trying to be. It sits alongside the medium-term financial strategy and the annual budget. So even though they're separate documents in terms of how they exist on paper form, what one sits alongside the other, and therefore the business plan and then the annual the MTFS and then the annual budget provide the resources that enable us to deliver this. Those resources, as you know, Chair, are drawn from a range of different sources. Some of that being core funding. Doubtless we'll touch on that in the next item when we talk about the budget, which is why we do them against each other in the at this time of year as part of our approval process. They're drawn from Section 106. They're drawn from the bit of earned income we bring, but importantly and increasingly they're drawn from external funding. There's always a degree of variability around that, particularly for things that we intend to do but we don't have secured funding for. And of course, the secured funding depends on the success or otherwise of the authority in winning external funding bids. We know that one of those, Revitalise, comes to an end at the end of this financial year. We know that we've got one very big multi-annual project programme in play, which we hope to find a bit more about from the National Lottery Heritage Fund by the end of this year. And so undoubtedly within the set of milestones, there are some milestones that depend on the ability to leverage decreasing core funding to bring in external funding. So there will always be, but my view is always you should be ambitious, and that means sometimes you will set milestones and objectives that through fate of circumstance you're not able to deliver, but you set them in the best of intentions and expectations that you will deliver. And so that there is an element of that in the plan. In previous years, we've specified alongside each milestone where the funding is coming from. We'd end up with quite a long and detailed document if we put you exactly the individual sources and the contribution towards it. So I think members have to take on a degree of confidence that behind the scenes as officers we know where the funding is or it will come from. But I can assure you that that's something that we are able to do.
Okay, so at the front end of ambition, we would expect to be able to resource the things that we've got in here now.
Correct.
A kind of educated guess at hopes and dreams.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's useful. The recommendation is that members approve the strategy and business plan methods. Sorry? Yeah, go on then. Yeah, quick one.
It says about developing the project. You find it. It mentions on how the farming in North Yorkshire Moors can deliver biodiversity net gain or carbon credits. Now, is the Environmental Farmers Group is working the whole area of the North Yorkshire Moors National Park and surrounding it as well. Now, FIPL has given them money towards the initial meetings. They were looking for people to put the names forward and areas of land forward so that the whole area had, if somebody wanted carbon credits or biodiversity net gain for a project, then there would be one place to go to and one price rather than going to 2 or 3 different places and see where they could get the cheapest price from. Now, are we working with them or are we just going on our own and seeing how it works?
So is there something in the plan that refers to?
Between milestone 126 and 127.
Brian has left the building. Okay. Well, in fact, I know you raised this at the members' update.
I did. Because I think it's worthwhile.
Sure, it is like a FIPL project that we're funding and they're doing their thing. And we will evaluate that.
I didn't know whether we were putting Levisham in as possibility because it was an area of land, or whether we were just holding back to see how it went. I know there is some areas that you maybe can't put in, but it was more a case of the bigger the area, the more power they had to deliver on their needs.
Yeah.
But
and I think that the answer to that was we're not sure yet. That Levisham's got other commitments as well. So we'll park that in the absence of Brian, and we'll come back to it if that's okay.
Okay.
I don't see what else we could do here and now, to be honest. Thank you. So, back to the recommendation, and members approve. Hang on a minute, no, we've done that. Members approve the strategy and business plan milestones for 25-26, as discussed. All happy with that? I'll take that as unanimous. Thank you, Kate. Sorry for having to play musical chairs. So on then to our budget. 25-26. Pete's here to do that one for us.
Morning, everybody. I've got a presentation for this one, which I don't know if it's up at the moment, is it? Yes, it is, yeah. So normally when I come to this forum in March, it's a case of saying that we've taken this to FRASC, apologising to FRASC members for the same presentation, and going through the budget. In this instance, we've had quite substantial changes in the paper since the FRASC paper in February, as a result of the DEFRA grants, and a bit more information coming through on that. So the first slide really is just to go through a little bit of an introduction, and just a reminder again about where we were in December in previous papers. So in December we laid out the pressures and uncertainties that face the authority, and they are broadly inflationary pressures, a lot of uncertainty around pay award, DEFRA grants and inflation that's making long-term planning and planning for sustainability very difficult. A reiteration of our strategy around ambitious growth plans despite the reduction of DEFRA grants. And that project-based delivery that's really helping to strategically address the fact of the DEFRA core grant reducing and delivering far more through that project external funding platform and Section 106 funding. In terms of that uncertainty, uncertainty still remains on pay award, one of our very biggest numbers. So we still have no idea what the local government offer will be. There is a union ask out there in the public arena. And we have seen broadly at the moment our assumption is 3%, but we've seen broadly at the moment other offers in line with that. But we have currently no information about what that local government NJC offer is going to be. So for now, that remains at 3% in the budget, but remains a risk. But DEFRA grant, the other big one, we have far more information on that now. And a reminder that when we took the MTFS in December, we had a £345,000 deficit position that we had mitigated. And that included that NI increase, which at that time we assumed we would have to meet ourselves, and that's since proved correct, that we will need to find the increase NI that came out of the budget statement in October. Again, all budget proposals in line with business plan objectives, and that continues to be the case. We've had a long discussion already this morning about next year's objectives, and this MTFS and the budget paper that we do today is very much underlying the resources to help to deliver that. And then most key assumptions remain the same as that paper in December that you saw, and indeed FRASC in February, with the exception of DEFRA grant allocations. And then this new budget that we bring today is assuming a 59k drawdown from contingency reserve to help you able to produce a balanced budget, and I'll go through some of the detail of that. And then still high levels of uncertainty, as I've mentioned. Now there's every chance we might need to bring a revised budget back to NPA, and the only time I've had to do that in 6-7 years is COVID year. When we approved one in March that we knew would change substantially as we locked down in March 2020. And again, depending on the final confirmations around DEFRA grants, particularly around the capital side, plus the pay award and potentially risk around that, we'll probably bring something back in June NPA paper just to confirm any changes. So the headlines, so income and expenditure of 13.5 million, that's increased by about 900,000 since the February report, primarily FIPL and the confirmation of extensions FIPL for 1 year. So in February we had about £126,000 of advisory funding in there. We've now got just over £1 million worth of funding, with DEFRA confirming an extra year if that's part of the sort of the settlement conversations that we've been having. But even so, that has reduced a little bit, that FIPL, from what it was in that sort of in the current year, and that's the main reason for that overall current reduction in income and expenditure compared to last year's original budget. We also do have a pipeline of external funding projects to come too, which is unconfirmed, so there is every expectation that that number will increase in year. And just a confirmation again of how that splits in terms of our resources. So earned income, you can see there's a small increase in that this year compared year on year. External funding, So external funding 2.1 million, and then FIPL on top of that an extra million. And then Section 106 funding, which increases with RPI each year. And at the moment, that's currently an estimation for Woodsmith. That'll be confirmed in this month. And then our core grants, so you can see there that we have reduced our core grants in the paper by 9%. So that's what we expect the reduction to be, approximately. And then there is a DEFRA capital injection in 25-26 to effectively, in this paper, reduce to replace that revenue reduction in core grant. And I'll go through that in a little bit more detail in the coming slides. So this one is the DEFRA grant. This is the main changes. So the FRASC report assumed the flat cash settlement of 4.382 million. That's been the same number for about 5-6 years. I'll probably get confused over the next year with it being different for the first time in a while. But since FRASC, so this is the confirmation changes, we had a confirmation that there'd be a revenue cut of 4 million across the 10 NPA authorities. So that's 4 million across of revenue, but that 15 million of capital will be made available in 25-26. So the cut in revenue grant to be replaced by capital funding with the remaining 11 million to be distributed. So in effect, we'll see that 4 million reduction in revenue grant. We're assuming that that 4 million will be replaced by capital grant. So effectively our grant agreement, instead of being a revenue grant agreement, will be in two parts. And then there'll be an additional 11 million which will be to be distributed. At the time we wrote this paper, there was a lot of uncertainty about how that would be split. So we've had to make assumptions in the paper that they will be split evenly across the 10 parks. That does look like that will be the case, but the paper assumes a 9% reduction. It looks like it'll be more like about 8.2%. So that will be about 35k better than this paper illustrates at the moment for us in terms of the revenue grant cut. So not quite as much as we assume here. At the moment, we've got no confirmation, final confirmation of that capital, 11 million, and how that will be split. We do expect that probably to be even, which will be 1.1 million per park. That being that the case, the paper doesn't cover how that 1.1 million will be spent. So the intention is to bring that back to June NPA to have further confirmation about how we will look to allocate that funding. So to reconfirm there, 9% cut, it's more likely to be 8.2%. Means in this paper we've found 394k to replace that, and there's no assumption at this point around that additional capital. A couple of quick slides on the other areas which remain broadly the same as the FRASC paper. So we've got an external funding target spend of 2.4 million in 25-26. At the point of FRASC, we were just short of that, but with a pipeline of expected projects to come through, we are now above that with a confirmation of another year of farming in protected landscapes. So we do expect to exceed that target. And we've seen, again, within our external funding bids at the moment, we're seeing an increased ability to be able to fund some of those core costs. And we do want to look at how we fund those corporate and some of those services that are currently coming out of DEFRA grant, how we can enable those through external funding sources. And there's Appendix 4 has a breakdown of the project expenditure included in the report, and we only include secured funding. So there's no assumptions of unsecured within the paper. On earned income, so we're looking at increasing the car park tariffs by not 30p and 50p. Just a note that as part of the mitigation of the 394, this is slightly higher than the FAST proposal in February. But that's part of being able to kind of meet some of the revenue cut. Planning fees, so we're expecting those to increase in 25-26 as statutory fees. So we can increase them anyway by inflation, but we also expect those per legislation coming through to increase. Investment interest is capped at 2% on balances of 6 million for next year. So again, this is the MTFS policy of making sure that we don't sustain on investment interest, which is temporary. You'll see in a paper later with the Treasury, we expect interest rates to come down over the next few years, and we don't want to be dependent on that. So anything above that 2% will go into reserves and enable us to deliver more through that channel. Retail margins, so we have a retail strategy review going on at the moment, so we expect again retail margins to increase next year and make sure that the retail functions in our visitor centres deliver for us financially as well as in terms of delivery on sites. They are commercial operations at the end of the day, and at the moment they do run at a small loss, and we want to reverse that position through the strategy. And then finally, for many years now, we've had the Ethic Energy loan, which delivers 16.8k per year in earned income. That's coming to an end now in the current year, so therefore isn't in the budget next year. Other income budgets then remain broadly the same, bar where we can inflationary increases within agreements, etc. And there's a breakdown of earned income in Appendix 3. Section 106, so this one's a bit more straightforward insofar as both of these agreements have inflation links and remain broadly the same. We are forecasting 2.6 million of carry forward funds at the end of this year in relation to the Woodsmith agreement. And as always, it's worth pointing out that that's a little bit around about the 1 year's worth of allocation. We have a 3-year payback, so we're not at any kind of risk of that currently. And the long delayed signage project now shows signs of progressing. So we are starting to see a little bit of spend this year, and we're starting to see that move forward. Breakdown of Section 106 agreements is in Appendix 5. So a little bit on revenue expenditures. This remains quite a lot the same, but pay costs of 4 million is by far the largest area of spend. I've already mentioned pay award, which was built in at 3% being a significant risk. And again, if we do see that coming through at 4 or 5%, then that's something we will certainly need to bring back either in June or in year to help to mitigate that. That NIC increase of 125k to the authority from the October statement. So again, as expected, we're not getting any support for that. So that's something we've had to find in mitigation in the budget. And then utility costs, we have been able to reduce those by 50k following the new contract, following a year into that new contract. We do have savings in year, which we've been reporting through FRASC in the quarterly reports. Again, as part of the budget, we've got an extra year of that 75% rates relief on our visitor centres. So that's been built in. General overhead inflation, 2%. So that's what we've built in currently. Now, you'll know that inflation rate is running at 2 to 3. It's a little unpredictable at the moment. So again, that's one to watch. But for now, we've built that in at 2%. Over the course of this year, the current year, it's been running at about 3%. Or so, and we built in 4, so we do have a little bit of leeway on that, but it's one certainly to watch. Increased costs for apprentices, new finance system. We've reduced the vacancy factor because the last 2-3 years now we've been seeing vacancies in core funded posts running much lower than usual, much lower turnover, and then audit fees. So audit fees we do expect to go up by about another 7,000 or 8,000 next year. Training costs and reduced net com spend will help to partly offset that. So we've got a little bit of a reduction in training costs and then some within comms as well. There is a potential as part of the DEFRA announcements of funding our £20,000 National Parks England subscription fee. So we effectively pay a fee into National Parks England each year, as all national parks do, or as 8 national parks do. There is the potential for DEFRA to fund that from a separate pot. So again, that's not built into here. So we may see it improve on the bottom line by 20,000 from that as well. So it's worth bearing in mind that the paper has a 59k ask from reserves. We have a potential 35,000 better from the 9% to 8.2%. And then this 20,000 contribution to NPE. So actually that might almost offset that ask. But for the moment and for today, we're asking members to approve that 59k drawdown. So that 59k, we've got a contingency reserve. It's what it's there for ultimately. And therefore, we asked today to use that to help to balance off the budget. So capital expenditure. So in previous times, we've often not reported them separately. And I think national parks generally don't report the two necessarily separately when we bring them in terms of budget monitoring or budget setting. I think that will have to change over the next year. I think this increasing drive of DEFRA providing capital funding means that we'll probably need to start reporting them separately and much more clarity, both through budget monitoring quarterly, but also budget setting. The last minute nature of the changes from DEFRA means we've not been able to do that fully in this report, but we'll be looking to do that over the next year and certainly for the next FRASC in terms of quarterly monitoring. So that can be monitored a little bit separately and a bit more clarity between the two. The budget paper assumes 394k capital funding and thereby expenditure. And it's based on the assumption that capital funding will at least replace the revenue reduction. So the principle that whatever we lose in revenue grants, we will get back in capital grant. That assumption is for 1 year only. The capital element is 1 year only. We'll see what comes with the review, the comprehensive review later in the year. DEFRA has provided criteria, and I think it's quite useful to kind of lay this out in terms of what DEFRA's criteria for that spend is going to be. Largely in 2 criteria. One around innovation, investor save and income generating activities. So projecting quantifiable costs, so anything that provides a quantifiable cost saving. Something that generates income generation or leveraging of other funding. So really looking at those principles of maybe pulling away from core grant dependency and being able to raise our own revenue. Upgrades of capital assets around major defects, maintain operation, reduction of carbon emissions, accelerating towards net zero. Activities that identify innovating new approaches and efficiencies. Again, all of these things kind of, some of them driving towards that kind of more efficiency of use of core grants to be able to become less dependent. and direct contribution to furthering PL statutory purposes to avoid unnecessary use of revenue. So you can see that kind of general theme of pulling away from the dependency on revenue of core grant by using this capital injections, but it's also very broad as well. It's quite a broad set of criteria, so it's not too limiting in terms of what we might want to do. And the other criteria was around the 30 by 30 delivery stream, so being able to use it within that arena, enabling additional areas of protected landscapes to meet those published criteria. So capital expenditure, so the proposal to be worked up once additional funding is confirmed. So again, we'll come back in June once we know what that's going to be. And the options potentially there are around our property and property move. New car park acquisition is one potential option as well that will generate revenue. Investment in our visitor centre assets to reduce the net cost of those. Purchase of vehicles, so we've got the option as well that we have to purchase our capital vehicles. We could do something along those lines to avoid future need to replace them. And then required work on assets. We have a number of assets, car parks, etc., that have required works that we'll need doing. We have the option for that as well. So there's a few options there that all fit into that definite criteria that we will come back with at June NPA. And work's underway with the auditors and CIPFA to ensure that the classification of capital is appropriate. There's a number of areas that are very clear if you're working on your own asset, things like that. There's a lot of clarity around that. Other areas such as capitalising salaries, particularly where it's on assets that we don't own, so maybe landowners' assets where we're doing capital works on those within Ranger team. How can we treat those? And we think most of that can be capitalised, but there's just some work to be undertaken by all national parks with CIPFA in early April just to understand and establish those rules. And then the 394k capital in the paper. So the big challenge here is we've got 394k less revenue. We need to replace that. So it's effectively revenue cuts that we need to offset. And I think it's just worth pointing out how we've done that in the paper. And the fact that as directors, we kind of thought this might be coming. So the indications from DEFRA in the annual meetings was that capital was more available than revenue, that this capital element of the grants may be coming in. So we have done some work around trying to identify some of this mitigation. Is the reversal of reserve contributions for vehicles, IT and property. So you'll know every year we put in a smoothing reserve in effect, the same amount we put in every year for a 10-year rolling programme. Those contributions are revenue funding, not capital, even if they've ultimately been spent on capital. So we'll need to reverse those and actually just directly spend capital from the grant. It's not ideal. It means we have to put maybe a suboptimal 10-year smoothed programme, which doesn't replace things at the ideal times, but it is a way of making sure that we can easily convert what we do ultimately spend on capital to capital rather than that revenue contribution. We've got IT hardware and some license spend, so some of that is already capital, so we're able just to simply classify that as capital anyway. And then things like uniform, PPE, tools, some of the materials we use can all be capital as well by nature. So some of the things we already spent from the grant are capital in any case. And that adds up to around about the 285,000 mark. So 285,000 of that has been offset. We've then found another few bits of savings where we've been able to change the funding for certain elements like archaeology grants and land of iron legacy work being funded from alternative sources, and a little bit of reduction in a couple of areas, and the pre-mentioned car park tariff increase as well has just helped to find another 50,000, and that indicates then a 59k shortfall in the 394, which we're asking from reserves for next year. Savings, this remains the same in the paper, so these are the key savings that we need to monitor next year, all of where some work is required to be able to deliver them. So more than ever, we need to report these through the quarterly FRASC reports and make sure that we're progressing them, because there's actually work that needs to be done to deliver the majority of these by officers. So increasing importance on savings next year. Reserves, 6.74 million at the end of December 2024, 4.2 million of that is the restricted reserves around external funding and section 106. 1.7 million has been earmarked for capital spend already by members previously, and we've got 0.8 million to manage risk, of which we're looking to draw down 59,000 in 25-26. And then a full update to reserves will be taken 24-25 and will be brought back anyway as part of May's outturn FRASC report. 25-26 budget, expect the reserves will continue to reduce and be spent where they've been earmarked. And then again, just a note on that contribution from reserves. So a quick thing on key risks again. Pay award, a really big risk for me that we haven't had any indication so far. we normally, by this point, we would at least have an offer on the table, even if we didn't know whether that was going to be increased or not. Currently, we have no view of that, so that's a key risk. And DEFRA grant, so we think the detail here is what we will get. We're still waiting for those kind of final allocations, but we're pretty sure around the 8.2% cut in revenue that will be replaced by a capital element and that will get a bit more. But future years remains our biggest concern. Don't expect the news necessarily to get any better in future years. The capital will continue to be more available than revenue, and this theme of capital to help us generate more to reduce reliance on core grants, I think, is a theme to continue potentially. So we absolutely have to be sort of alive to that, and our strategy around project funding and project delivery remains really important, and we need to continue to address these things early. I think that's the key, not addressing them last minute, but again early in terms of strategically addressing potential future deficits. But uncertainty, we don't know what that will be, the CSR later this year. Savings programs to achieve, there are, like we've laid out, substantial savings which require work to make sure they're delivered. So they're getting more difficult, and inflation. So we know that there's a lot of worldwide economic risk at the moment. We know that inflation took off a few years ago unexpectedly, and there's still that risk that could happen again. So it's still what we want to keep a really key eye on. And then interest rates. So again, the paper later, the Treasury paper, has a forward view of interest rates, etc. Just one that we do expect those to come down if inflation goes down. So one to keep an eye on. Earned income risk, as always, one of our big risks. Car parks and things like that, as we've known this year, by being a little bit lower on the car park income side, we're quite sort of things like weather and things are really quite essential in key periods. And then retail and planning. Planning, we're expecting those fees to go up. But we know, again, planning's been a risk early in this year. We had a big downside in planning over a couple of years, which actually is starting to recover this year in terms of income. So just all ones to watch in year and monitor. And then property investments, we know we've got some big property investment requirements coming up, both to this building, but or the new proposals, or indeed some of our car parks that do need some large requirements. So one to watch. And the recommendations in the paper that the members approve the proposed budget. Legally, we have to approve a budget by the 31st of March. So I'm proposing this with a view to coming back in June NPA for any substantial changes. And that separately, the members approve the drawdown of 59k from the contingency reserve to balance the budget.
Thanks, Pete. A lot to cover in a short time. It's unfortunate, it's not ideal at all that we have our budget coming to NPA without the benefit of FRESC having considered it. That's where we are, and so things have moved on. And, apologies to Colin and Heather that we haven't had time to get FRESC to look at this until now. Questions or comments from members? Malcolm and then Patrick.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pete. It's certainly a lot to take in, isn't it? I mean, the first thing is just, the timing of this. I mean, it's absolutely last minute, isn't it, that we've had to do all of this? And you've clearly been preparing and discussing with, with DEFRA, so thanks for doing all of that. And the second reaction is there's just it's a significant change, isn't it, from capital, from the revenue to capital. And it's a totally different way that we're going to have to think about it. There's a lot for us to pick up on this at the next minute, or at its next meeting. I mean, there's some good things. Obviously, people continuing is good. But I think overall, I mean, clearly the recommendation I endorse. I mean, the fact that it's only 59,000 that we have to take from the reserves, and that's what the reserves are there for. That's why we have them. It's for times like this when there's just so much uncertainty around that you clearly illustrated there. That this is what we need to do to get the balanced budget. But equally, we really have to monitor it and see both how our planned expenditures are going and what these other unknowns are that will gradually be revealed to us. So it's different times. Usually, at this committee, we just sort of nod everything through and Frask agreed it, and that's it. It's really different this time. So well done for where you've got to us. Thank you, Chair. Pete, as always, very, very well presented. What a lot of complex figures. I just wanted your view, though, on, given that the previous item we've just been discussing our very ambitious number of milestones, does this switch from revenue to capital likely to have any impact on the fantastic staff who work here, on staff numbers?
No, so we're not expecting 25, 26 for it to have any impact on staff numbers, and indeed we've not had to tailor the last report for any of these changes. So I think because it's, and on Malcolm's point, coming so late in the day is very, very unhelpful in terms of having so little time to react. But as directors, we kind of have an inkling this might be coming, albeit not knowing how much. So we have been able to do a little bit of pre-planning in the last month or so, with a possibility knowing it might come. I think we already have some capital spend that's capital anyway from the grant, so that's that 285 that we've just been able to kind of switch into the space. And then a couple of other areas we've been able to kind of mitigate and small areas like that. But I think the future years concern me. So not next year. I think next year our delivery is okay. As Tom mentioned before, there's some that are dependent on winning external funding bids that may be in train. So they're all allocated a resource, and some of those will be the external funding elements that you have to win them to be able to deliver. So that remains a risk. But in terms of this, it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed that element. But if it cuts any deeper in terms of capital, over and above sort of the 8.2% looking at the moment in future years, it will strategically change what we do. So I think we already need to start thinking about that and about how we would address that early. And I think the strategy we've got around trying to move core funded services out into project delivery is absolutely the right one. I think it's really helped us over sort of the last few years continue to adapt to this situation. So yeah, I think certainly the last report there's been no changes to that as a consequence of this. So we've not had to readdress that one rapidly.
Good.
And there won't be any kind of staff changes as a consequence of this this next year. But as we continue to look at those future years, and if we continue to see deeper cuts in revenue, then strategically we have to address that. And I guess all options remain open as far as that's concerned.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
I think I just want to draw out the remark Pete made about future years. I think whilst we'd have a reasonable degree of confidence that we can manage use of capital in a way that will enable us to manage a transition, the signals that we're getting from the department about the long-term direction in terms of revenue funding are really, really challenging. And so it's absolutely vital and essential that we accelerate that trajectory as an organisation of de-risking away from core revenue funding by an increasing body of our work that was previously core funded being delivered through external funding projects. So I hope we can manage that transition very, very carefully, but I will, in terms of responsible and prudent long-term financial management, we will have to keep taking a look at that as an organisation. And also make sure that we invest, when we come to the recommendations about capital, make sure that we invest capital very, very wisely in areas that are going to reduce our long-term operating costs as an organisation or are going to increase revenue to the organisation. They're going to be really important for us to make sure we make shrewd investments.
And so it's all about outputs, you know. It's about what the National Park delivers for the public in the end. And the more of that goes out there and the less of it that gets taken up in the delivery, you know, the better. So although this is challenging, it's no way to run a business. You know, there are some opportunities too, and I think we should look at it like that. I think indications are that, you know, if you can utilise capital at short notice, there will be more opportunities. And I have to say, you know, in our English family, I think we're at the front of the field in doing that. So very well done to officers. And yeah, I've got that. So I've got Heather, Michelle, Janet. I'm going to take you all three and shut Pete up until you've finished, because otherwise so you'll have to make a few notes, Pete. And then I've got this. So,
right, Pete. Okay, so it's all been said. I mean, it all came this last minute, but I've got to take some positives from it, really. I mean, if we look at the capital for 24, 25, if I add up the vehicle replacement, IT, blah, 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 it comes to about 258,000, doesn't it? And last year. So, I mean, are all those, there's two things, are all those complete? I mean, is none of this stuff there that we haven't actually got yet that we can push into next year and take, you know, can we, you know, it's all about number crunching. I mean, as I said, you know, that's, say, £358,000 we spent this year on capital. So that wasn't a problem. That's one question. So have we got everything completed? Or was anything that we haven't received, say the ITT isn't in place, it might be ordered, push it into next year? Or the other thing is, what about the capital property reserve? I mean, surely, I mean, we're talking about a car park, possibly buying a car park. I mean, I'm not sure where this, it's not probably for this meeting, unfortunately, we haven't had the FAST meeting, so I don't want to bore everybody with it, but I'd like to know what the restrictions are on this capital thing, whether you don't know about it yet. But there might be some way we can move about the stuff we've got from this year and shove it into next year. All quite legal, but that's what I'd be looking at. That's one thing, but if you want to come back on that page, I've got another question. Thank you.
I mean, thanks for the presentation. I thought you covered the issues well. I think it's like everything else at the moment. I think it's I think we have to be prepared for the unexpected, and anything could happen in the next few weeks. We just have to, I think, operate on the basis that we need to be nimble and flexible, which seems to be approach. The question that I've got to ask you is about earned income. And the problem is, like everybody else, public bodies get drawn into this issue about increasing earned income at a time when the budgets are being cut. And one of the reasons the budgets are being cut is because there isn't actually that much money floating around out there, and the economy is either, well, certainly stalled at the moment. So decisions around leisure, etc., tend to also be the type of things that tends to get dropped. So somebody might not decide to go and do certain activities. What's the degree of confidence that we have got, given that the mood music does seem to be money is still tight, people are voting with their feet and are looking at the bank balances, and while I get the theory and I don't disagree with it, it can often become it's the right thing to do, but it never actually transpires in reality because the economy itself doesn't allow it to come forward, if that makes sense.
On top of that,
I'm writing them down, so it's all right. Really good questions, actually. I think in terms of timing of capital spend, we're a little bit late in the year now for anything really to be able to be pushed out, because actually most things have been delivered. But one of the big challenges that we've got is that we've got this 10-year smooth programme, which we have the same contribution every year. We're going to have to change that and change how that programme's laid out. So other options maybe to buy, we might have bought 2 vehicles next year. Is there the option actually to spend forward next year while we have a capital injection to buy more vehicles to save a bit of pressure off future? It's those kind of things. So rather than this year and being able to push out, it's more about we need to do a piece of work to look at the next 2, 3, 4 years and what that capital projection looks like and how we smooth that programme. So absolutely timing of capital spend for those future years is a piece of work we need to pick up as part of the extra funding that we'll get, and just have a look at, actually compare that to maybe other propositions and which one of those proposals will deliver the best for us ultimately. So that's a piece of work to do with the teams to understand where our vehicles are at, the age of vehicles, and how optimal it would be to replace them earlier than planned. So absolutely, yeah, a piece of work to do. But in terms of this year, most capital's now been spent, so there isn't much opportunity to push out a year. In terms of the other question, earned income's always a massive risk. Absolutely take the point that economically at the moment, and I know Joel's team and Lucas spend a lot of time looking at those kind of profiles, particularly around things like retail and what's happening in the centres. Part of retail strategy is about looking at actually what's happening in terms of retail purchases in trends over years, and actually how that's changing in terms of the profile of what's being bought, who's coming into retail, who's converting in terms of that conversion of people coming to the visitor centre and then converting through the retail sector. So a lot of that has been undertaken. It is one of the big risks. There's a lot of work at the moment going on around sort of national park passes. Some of the passes deliver really, really good value for people that are regular users of either one car park or multiple car parks. So there's quite a lot of work going on around that. But absolutely, it's one of those real sensitivities that certainly Joel and Lucas in Joel's team pays a lot of attention to when they're looking at those kind of earned income areas. But earned income is a really important area for us. It's not easy to expand. There's a reality that actually at the moment car parks is the only one that makes a margin for us. The others are actually at a net cost, including retail. So we've had this kind of desire to work on visitor centre facilities and things to be able to generate more people to come. But absolutely, if the economy gets worse again, and we've obviously had a very difficult 3 or 4 years and continues to be unpredictable, then it is a risk to us and one that we have to monitor quarterly with that in mind.
Sorry, Chair. One question, Peter. I did ask about property reserve. Would it be possible to put, because you can, do we not know we can put it in there? I mean, obviously, you're looking at lots of things going on, and could it go in there? Are you not aware of that yet?
So the property reserve is built up. We put £50,000 a year into that, but we've also made some one-off contributions into that. And it's for a couple of purposes. One, some of that is around the property move, whatever we might do. So whatever the conclusion is of that business case that comes, it might be for that. But also it's about a smoothing reserve for the continual maintenance of our assets, car parks, etc. What we can do, of course, is members can allocate that as they see fit. So at the moment, that's been allocated to a rolling programme. But if members wanted to look at how some of those reserves have been allocated in the past and reallocate them, that is something that's an option for members.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah, so it wouldn't go into reserve because it's coming in year as funding, but we can absolutely use it against property.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was trying
Yes,
to say.
sorry, yeah. So I put up the criteria earlier, and property's absolutely one of those.
Yeah, we could swap that for the revenue that we put in there now.
Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go to Janet Raggett and John Ritchie, and then we'll catch up with Pete again.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Pete, for your presentation and your report. I think the previous questioners have asked a number of the questions that I had. The fundamental was how capital and revenue can be interchanged, and that's been fully replied to. Just to let you know, I have read the report in detail, and the Section 106 income is 98% of the income, and I just presume that's a rounding matter, not that some issues are more than others. I will leave that there. Other thing is the context of the context of the work that we did on the Recreation and Wellbeing Board in terms of that visitor income and the visitor centres. Absolutely key retail, so understand that. So one question that's new is the 20,000 of DEFRA funding that you've presented to us. Is there any way that compromises the independence of the National Park England? If National Park England are going to receive 20,000 from DEFRA and we're having to sort of move with the times, does that challenge our independence there? So that's really the only new question I have that hasn't been answered already from previous. Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for the presentation, really helpful.
Okay, so I'll just go to John Ritchie and then we'll come back again.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly appreciate the clarity of the report that we've been presented with. And although many of the figures you've talked about have been presented within the report, there are some that haven't been. And I'd be really grateful if we'd have a copy of your presentation. In relation to DEFRA funding, and the 9 million across, the assumption is it's going to be spread evenly across the 10 national parks. What level of confidence do we think that is going to be the case? Or if not, why wouldn't it be the case that this funding is spread evenly across all 10 national parks?
I'm happy to let Tom pick up both of those questions.
So, National Parks England and
sure, they're both really good questions, and I think the question you raised about the allocation of funding towards the cost of MP subscriptions is one that certainly has crossed our mind as chief execs, because we wouldn't want the independence of National Parks England, to speak truth to power, to be compromised. That said, DEFRA are really keen to see national parks work collectively as one and speak with one voice. And part of the rationale behind the funding is to provide incentives for those two national parks that are not members of National Parks England to rejoin on the basis that if you're getting the funding, why wouldn't you do that? I think at this stage, I'm reasonably satisfied that DEFRA is making that offer on the basis that it isn't likely to restrict NPE's activities and is likely to strengthen the organisation's ability to collectively represent the 10 English national park authorities in a way that works well for the department. But it's definitely one of those things that we should keep under control. I'm sure when the board meets in early April, Chair, it will consider that point around long-term independence. I think the second point in relation to confidence around the numbers, I mean, never have Pete and I put a budget together that has been so variable in terms of the things that are happening, because this has been a moving feast over the last couple of weeks. I think now we can speak with a reasonable degree of confidence about the reduction in revenue funding, which Pete has articulated earlier, of 8.2% across each of the 10 national park authorities, and what that means in terms of our revenue baseline for next year. I think we can speak with a high degree of confidence that the reduction in revenue funding will be offset by a corresponding allocation of capital. And I think we can speak with a high degree of confidence that the remaining 11 million will be spread equally across all 10 national park authorities, which basically means 1.1 million of additional capital over and above the 400,000 circa 400,000 to North York Moors. Thereby our capital allocation, which will be for 1 year only, our capital allocation for next year will be 1.5 million. I reiterate what I said earlier about the risks in terms of the spending review period from 2026 onwards. We may know more about that towards the end of this year. I certainly hope we know more about it than the end of March next year, because that's no way to undertake financial management and planning. I equally think there's a likelihood that there'll be future capital allocations that will help us with ongoing capital activities, but they will not compensate for a reduction in long-term revenue funding, which is a massive challenge for all national park authorities, and one that, although we're reasonably well placed to weather the storm in the short term, is clearly going to be a challenge for us.
Just a clarification of what this 1.1 that we think we will get. Will it all have to be spent in this year?
I believe so. I believe it will need to be allocated and spent in the year. But it's one of the questions that the finance officers across the national parks are due to meet with DEFRA finance team in a couple of weeks' time, Pete, to clarify certain questions. But that's my understanding, is that we wouldn't be able to put that capital and put it into reserves. But again, I wouldn't want to hold my reputation on that, because there are some important questions we need to clarify with DEFRA.
Sort of bonkers planning for a business, isn't it? Sorry.
Well, I mean, having capital is better than not having capital, and having a cut, I have to say. So, I'm confident that officers will make this work for us as efficiently and effectively as can be done. But for now, we have to approve a budget. I mean, we don't have to, but it would be quite detrimental not to. And this is the only sort of sticking plaster approach that we can do to get that going. So we've had a pretty good discussion. My recommendation doesn't say quite the same as what Pete said on the board, but my recommendation at 15.1 and 2 is that members comment on and approve the proposed budget, and that members approve a 59k contribution from the contingency reserve needed to balance the budget. Is that what you're happy with, Pete?
Yeah, that's fine. Both have approved them, which is the key element.
Okay. So are we all happy to approve that? And I'm quite sure we'll be coming back to this formally and informally very soon. So that is approved. I'm just going to take a 5-minute comfort break, and then we'll pick on. I'm in your hands, members. We'll be finished when you're ready. Just however fast you want to go. Okay, members. We'll reconvene when you're all sorted. I think we're almost all here. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll carry on then. So, as item 10, it is our property review update. I can see Ian there, so I'm guessing it's him.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Purpose of the paper is to bring you up to date with progress on a range of works, notably in relation to our proposed new HQ and store, but also to bring you up to date on some work we've been doing at the National Park Centres as well. So part 3 of the report brings you up to date on our planning consent. As we've let you know previously, we got our consent from North Yorkshire Area Planning Committee in mid-January. And currently, Richard, our solicitor, and North Yorkshire Council's legal team are sorting out the Section 106 agreement. That's in relation to our biodiversity net gain obligations and our commitments around our active travel plan. That work isn't completed yet. There's no issues around that. It just takes a little bit of time to sort those out. And Richard, I don't know whether you've got an estimated time yet from the North Yorkshire lawyers about how long they'll take with that.
Not really, but I would estimate it's going to take about 3 weeks.
Okay.
That's
That's great. So as yet, we don't have our formal planning consent, and we just need that Section 106 agreement to be sorted, but no issues there as far as we can see. Part 4 of the report takes you through our developing thinking on the development and the best use of the site. As you'll be aware, there's an existing building on the site called, known locally as the Old Print Works. And we had originally considered what use we might be able to make of that, but some initial reports we had suggested that the building was beyond economic repair. However, as we looked again at the building in autumn last year, I went with our property manager, Helen Barry. We were left scratching our heads again about that advice, and so we took a second opinion. And so the core of the building, the concrete floor slab and the steel structure are all sound. And so we got round to thinking, well, actually, why are we putting another concrete floor slab and some more steel down on the back of our office building when actually we've got some of that already on site. So we're proposing that we reuse the Old Print Works. It needs a reasonable amount of work to it. It needs re-roofing, and the concrete cladding needs replacing. But we think that will be a good spot for us to have our garage and store. And I can say a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And using that means that we don't need to have a garage building attached to the back of our office. And appendices 2 and 3 to the report give you some plans just illustrating what a revised office building might look like without that structure on the back of it. Now, there are a significant number of advantages in using the site this way, particularly operationally, and we believe in terms of the locality. Para 4.5 goes through those advantages, and we do see that there are some benefits in moving workshop and so noisier work further away from both residents and our office use. So significant advantage there, and also it means that we can reconfigure slightly the office building and insert some windows back on the first floor, which were originally taken out because we had the garage sat adjacent to it. We would also expect to reduce the size of the Old Print Works, which will by about a third because it's far too big for our purposes. And that would certainly help with the view as you look down from Rickle Drive and Rymore, the view down our site. So para 4.6 outlines the cost and planning issues around this. Now, there's obviously likely to be additional cost in refurbing the old print works, but we expect that to be offset by us not constructing a garage on the rear of our office building. Now, we're in discussions with North Yorkshire Council planners, and Chris will update us on that in a moment. So we believe that much, if not all, of the works that we want to do will come under our permitted development rights, and Chris has spoken to the North Yorkshire Council planning officer and given his view, and I believe, Chris, we're still waiting for a response on that. But Peter Jones' initial view of our revised proposal was positive and didn't see any significant planning issues at all. But we're hoping we can do much of this under our permitted development rights. We discussed these revised proposals with the Property Working Group at the back end of January, and members of that group gave us every encouragement to pursue this. At the moment, Helen, Barry, and to a lesser extent myself, are going through all the very detailed work that's needed to pull together the tender pack. So this will go out to potential contractors, and it will detail every item that's going into that building down to the last nut and bolt. That tender pack will be published next month and will allow a couple of months for interested parties to submit tenders, and then we'll need to spend some time analysing those. Before coming back to you with a full business case, August, September time is what we anticipate at the moment. So overall, I'm content with progress that we've made. Planning consent has consolidated the value of our land asset there, and we'll be looking forward to coming back to you in due course with a business case. Now, that's not the only property work we've been doing over recent months. We continue to be busy looking at both national park centres and improving the facilities that we have there for the public and our visitors. So at Sutton Bank, as most of you will be aware, we installed a change in places toilet towards the end of last year, which is a big improvement. We've also made some technical changes to our heating system, so the staff there are thrilled that the heating system now actually works properly, but also that encourages visitors to linger longer. Possibly more importantly, we're just installing some new sets of external doors, which will help in terms of heat loss, but it will also help significantly in terms of access to the building. Those of you who are familiar with the site, as you enter the building, you've got some big, heavy old oak doors, which if you've got mobility issues, they open the wrong way. And so we'll be able to improve on that with some sliding doors. And that is all on top of the great works that colleagues are doing improving the tramper network at Sutton Bank. And as John mentioned a little bit earlier, we've got a bid in for Danby Lodge, building on the success of the new play area. We're applying for funding for an observatory in the grounds, and we're reasonably optimistic that we'll be successful there. So that'll be a new piece of work on the site at Danby Lodge. So all of that coupled with work on the new Ranger base at Bottom and exploring options for what we do in terms of our lease at Gromont. This has been a busy time on property. So I'll pause there, Chair, and very happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ian. Questions for Ian? Janet.
Thanks, Ian, and thank you for all the updates. I'm going to qualify this by saying these things happen. It's a shame that the changes to the planning weren't known in advance, but these things do happen and aren't unusual. But my question is, if the advice that we were given that it was uneconomical, and now we've had a second opinion and says actually it can be, the question is, have we from a line had other advice that we've also looked at again? Because if or was it a case that the sort of spec we gave them was could be interpreted in such extreme ways? Because that is the nub of my question, is if we've had to go back and get a second opinion, which is very different to the first, is that predicated elsewhere in this project? If that's a clear question, I hope it is, because that's the nub of what I want to ask.
I don't believe so. We asked them a very specific question about the old print works. We've modified our potential use of the site. We looked again at the core of the building. They were concerned that this is getting into detail, but they were concerned that the concrete floor slab was cracked in places. We've gone back and said, actually, we don't think it is really. And so we've had some tests done, and any cracking is only kind of surface rather than structural. So we're completely content that the new advice that we've got is correct and isn't leading us astray. To be fair to a line, we were proposing a slightly different use of the building and thinking about that at the time. So our thinking's moved on. So I don't believe that compromises any other advice that they may have given us.
Thank you.
Don't get me started on that. You know, if it wasn't right, why did we pay for it? But it's a journey, isn't it? And ultimately, we'll never get a consultant to tell us a definitive thing, which is absolutely. And I think if we thought we would do that, then we'd be spending a lot of money and still going round in circles. I forgot to just say that. So the property working group did have a look at this. How can I put it? Amendment and the reasons for it before Christmas, and we're basically, although asking exactly the same questions, you know, how come we're here now? We are here now, and I think generally it makes good sound sense. It's just a shame we weren't here in the beginning. So Property Working Group has had a look at this. Property Working Group is obviously just for those members who are keen to be closer to what's going on, and it doesn't actually make formal decisions, and that's why we're reporting it to NPA, and it's important to keep that definition. So the members of Property Working Group, apologise that you know have had a gallop around this already. I'll go to Colin and then Malcolm.
You mentioned Gromont. I take it that's the footbridge and car park that you're working with. And if you don't mind telling members how far you've got with that. And,
we're exploring options, as members may be aware. We've leased Gromont Car Park originally from Scarborough Council and now, of course, North Yorkshire Council for some time. Our lease comes to an end in a couple of years' time. So we've started exploring options with North Yorkshire Council to try and understand what their intentions are for the site. We also own on that site a railway bridge, which spans the Network Rail branch line from Middlesbrough to Whitby. That needs some work undertaking on it. So there's a whole series of issues that we're just trying to get a good understanding of around Gromont Car Park. Coupled with that, we're also responsible for some woodland at the site, which we're doing some work on. So while we do make some money out of Gromont Car Park, there are some liabilities that sit alongside that as an asset. So at the moment, we're exploring what North Yorkshire Council may wish to do in terms of extending our lease, if so, for how long. They're our leaseholders, so they're not duty bound to extend our lease either. So we're exploring where we might go next when the end of the lease comes in a couple of years' time.
So there's someone else, I forgot who it was. Mark.
Yeah, just to say, unfortunately, I couldn't attend the property working group. But I do remember the first time I wandered down, I can't remember whether it was you, not Clyde, but we wandered down the first time we saw that building. We thought, that might have potential. So it was a bit disappointing when to be told that there were structural problems that obviously we didn't know about. But the other side of that coin is I'm very pleased that we are actually using it for what seems a very good use.
Anything else? No, very good. Well, I just a couple of questions and comments. I mean, I think it's really good. I think it makes good sense if we could use a building that's there and it makes better opportunities for the office building and it makes the right sort of separation for the garage and the office use. I really would caution, given that we own that building and we will need to make the roof sound safe and stuff, regardless of whether we use it or not. So there's a cost there anyway. I really wouldn't take it. I wouldn't take any more down than you need to. I wouldn't shrink the size of it. You always find that you need more space. My hunch is that I'd be replacing the roof and using that of the building that you think you need. And leave the rest where it is for another day, rather than actually disposing of it and need to add it back again. So that's just a plea from practical experience. And the other thing, when we do the tender packs for this, given the urgency of getting our rangers into safe and appropriate accommodation, might there be opportunity in doing those tenders for someone to start doing that refurbishment of the old building first?
They'll go out as separate pieces of work because I think they are quite different in their nature. So yes, in answer to your question.
Good. I mean, I'm not sure whether that works out or not. I don't know if it would provide that opportunity.
Yeah, we're keeping that open as a possibility.
The other thing is, a briefing we had a sort of talk about where we've got to, and the recommendation that's written is that members note the work that has been undertaken in relation to delivering the desired outcomes of the property review. I think that given we're sort of moving on to this, we'll have a business case to support. And Janet's points about how good are the consultants' figures. There isn't a definitive answer to that, but we will have to think about that at the time that we consider our business case, and we'll have to come to a view on that. But given the changes the tweaks that we're making, I wonder if Ian and Tommy, it would be appropriate that we sort of, instead of saying noting the work, that we support the work that's been undertaken in relation to delivering the desired outcomes, and that would kind of give us some impetus to support where we've got to and keep going forward. Would that be an appropriate way to do it?
That would be very helpful if members agreed to that.
Are members happy to do that? Yeah. And so we could just change to say that members support the work that has been undertaken in relation to delivering the desired outcomes for the property review, as opposed to noting it. Yeah. I'm giving it as a change. I'm happy to move that from the chair. If Malcolm seconds that. Is everybody in favour? Anyone against? I know no. George isn't here. So that is carried. Yeah. Okay. Item 11 is the combined York and North Yorkshire Authority Local Growth Plan consultation. This one's for Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just talk briefly through the report just to summarise it for members. Hopefully you've read the report and some of you may have looked at the growth plan as well. So the first section of the report just sets out really what a local growth plan actually is. It's a document that is a legal requirement for a combined authority to prepare. It's essentially a regional economic strategy that covers a 10-year period. It's very closely integrated with central government strategies, for example, the National Industrial Strategy, and there's been a lot of close working between the government and the Combined Authority to produce this consultation draft growth plan. So we're now into the live consultation on the consultation. It was approved for public consultation by the Combined Authority at its meeting on the 7th of March. We've since now been told the consultation period has been shortened, so the consultation period ends on the 21st of April, so we're well within that. And it's really about trying to, don't know if this government uses the word level up, but even up regional disparities in economic growth. So it's a very strategic and it's a very important document for York and North Yorkshire. And I think it's also important where the 2 national park authorities and indeed the 5, I think it is, protected landscapes feature in what is essentially an economic document. So that's the background. There has been, I think, some really helpful, useful early collaboration with key partners and stakeholders. We've had meetings with the Combined Authority jointly with the Yorkshire Dales National Park. They're very keen to meet with us and talk to us about this plan. Section 3 summarises really the growth plan. So it's in different stages, and I'll go through each of those. Essentially, it's identified 5 priority sectors, economic sectors of this, I'll call it sub-region for growth. They're set out there for you: food and farming, engineering, biology and life sciences, clean energy, rail innovation and security, and creative industries and heritage. And they're about what makes this area distinctive and what are the economic strengths of this area to act as priorities for future growth. A sort of second set of priorities have been identified, and they've called those wider local priorities. And I think I'm really supportive of these. They're calling them local assets, and they're set out in the report in section 3.2. And I think these are very much more relevant to the work that the National Park Authorities undertake. So we have natural capital, the visitor economy, manufacturing, and micro and small businesses. And they sort of sit under these initial 5 priorities as local assets. The plan also seeks to try and be a little bit spatial in terms of areas to focus growth, and it's suggesting those are growth corridors, historic centre of York, the wonderful market towns that we have in North Yorkshire, rural, and obviously coastal as well. And then finally, underneath the local assets, it identifies what it's called strengthening the foundations, and they're about actually trying to optimise the conditions for economic growth. And again, some of those are ones that we're very familiar with, for example, dealing with skills shortages, affordable housing, and the hot potato digital connectivity as well. So if anybody is interested in diagrams, what I've just summarised is set out in Appendix 1 as a sort of triangular diagram that has the 5 priorities at the apex of the triangle, the local assets just underneath that, the spatial priorities for growth, and then these strengthening foundations at the bottom. So sort of illustratively, that provides a good diagram of what I've said so far. So I think the really important part of this report is section 4, which sets out and identifies the key areas of relevance for us as a National Park Authority, and picks up a number of points that I feel are important for us to feed back. I won't go through every one of them. I will just say it's really important that this growth strategy not just sort of works alongside our strategies. Obviously, Combined Authority is also a relevant authority under section 245 of the Levelling Up Act, so this document has to seek to further national park purposes as well. And I think it does that, and I think it's a very, very comprehensive, balanced economic framework that sort of sees the wider picture of how what we do and what the Yorkshire Dales does is helping that economic growth in terms of what we deliver for national park purposes, and the great natural capital that exists in the protected landscapes, the tourism economies, the farming economy, and that huge area of natural capital that the Combined Authority fully recognises the role of the protected landscapes in delivering this strategy for growth over the 10-year period. So I said I won't go into the details, but the points that I think do need picking up on, a few little bits of detail that need explaining. The document doesn't directly reference our key strategy, the management plan. It needs to do that in terms of interconnected strategies. It needs to talk a little bit more about the health benefits of the visitor economy as well. And a little bit more detail really about things like our dark night skies and how that contributes to tourism and the tourism economy. But I think in conclusion, I think 4.10 paragraph there concludes my thinking on this document, that when you used to pick up economic documents and strategies years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, they were quite divisive things. They were about economic growth being seen as being different to environmental protection, and there being a conflict between the two. That's not part of this at all, and it's all about how environmental protection, regenerative farming, natural capital, the visitor economy can actually help deliver the economic strategies in this document. So I think it's a very positive. It fully recognises the work of the protected landscapes, and therefore I think the recommendation is that I think the authority ought to support this and offer its support in terms of the overarching approach of the growth strategy, recognising where our work fits into that. And then also the recommendation is to ask members to agree the response based on section 4, but also any other issues that members want to raise. And also the consultation includes a survey on their website. So so what I'm suggesting is that I fill in that survey plus additional comments in the form of a report picking up section 4 in this. So that's the recommendation, Chair. Thank you.
Over to members. I got David. Yeah.
I agree with everything that Chris has been saying about this report. I think it's an excellent way forward for North Yorkshire as a whole, and in particular, so far as the national park is concerned. The 5 bullet points at para 3, I think, hold a lot of opportunities for the national park, and I'm particularly keen to see the importance being given to the visitor economy. Members will see there that it's worth just a tad short of £6 billion, which is a tremendous amount of money. But the good thing is that not only are we able to generate more visitors to the area, but it's the knock-on benefit that those visitors can have to the wider economy, the indirect businesses that would benefit from an increased tourism matter. And I wonder whether we can bring on board the regional mayor and the combined authority to take those aspirations forward. When you see that in the early report that we're looking to revamp and exploit the potential of the 2 national park visitor centres, I think those fit in very well with the tourism aspirations, and the aspirations in the growth plan, food and farming, so very important to the national park, supporting our the many small farms that we have in the park, and at the same time the craft industries and the heritage. I think it's got a lot to commend it, and I think it could play a very big part in taking forward the future of the national park. There is uncertainties. We've heard this morning from Pete as to the long-term funding from DEFRA, and I think we are here to help the way forward, and I'm sure that this is an opportunity for us to do so. And I welcome it wholeheartedly, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, David. Did you? Sorry. I can't tell who wants to say. I'll go to Malcolm and then I'll come back to Chris.
Just briefly, Jim, I mean, this is a really important document because it's about resource allocation, ultimately, and I'm so pleased that you got involved in discussions early on, and that they've taken on board all the things that you've outlined here. I mean, I recall there used to be a regional development agency and a regional economic plan that always had a sort of spatial element to it, exactly the same way this does. And it's so important that we're in the middle of this and making sure that the role of the planning system, both here and within the whole area, reflects the economic side and that they go together. So I think we really want to do that and get our input into it, and that they've accepted it, subject to the relatively minor comments that you've said we made, which I fully support.
Did you want to come back to that, Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just one of the things that I have picked up in the body of the report in full, which probably needs specifically mentioning because it's quite significant. It was based on David's comment about just how important the visitor economy is. That's £6 billion. So one of the suggestions is that the visitor economy is actually upgraded to becoming one of those 5 priorities or a 6th priority, rather than as it sits at the moment underneath those as just a local priority. Thank you.
Go on, Tom.
Yeah, it's just one other point of reflection in all this. I pick it up in my Chief Exec's report that members will be aware that in December, government published a devolution white paper that sets out the intentions of this government in terms of devolution of powers, responsibilities and funding, taking further the ambitions of the previous governments in that area. And just in the same way that we've been subject to local government reform and the creation of a new combined authority in York and North Yorkshire over the last couple of years, we're now starting to see that rolled out into the south of England as well. So my colleagues in the New Forest and South Downs are involved in these discussions at the moment. But I don't think it's beyond the possibility and plausibility that strategic authorities, as they're framed in the devolution white paper, like mayoral combined authorities, will take on more powers and responsibilities. And so from my point of view, it exemplifies even more the point that Malcolm was making about being really close and proximate to the combined authority and demonstrating that we have a really important role to play as a local regional delivery partner and stakeholder. So I've been pleased that we've been able to engage throughout in this process of developing the growth plan, and myself and the chair have got a forthcoming meeting with the mayor and the chief executive of the combined authority, which we're looking forward to as well.
I'll go to Jane and then Heather.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I absolutely agree with you on the fact that your point that perhaps the visitor economy should be framed into the top triangle, because I think that it is something, when it says competitive advantage sectors, I think that's what we have in this area. We have a competitive advantage due to our ruralness that we have for the visitor economy. So in a way, whether it fits in with one of the other 5 or whether it has its own, I think it is quite important that that is an area that's sort of highlighted, because from it comes the health and well-being that fits in with our purposes as well. And I think it tightens our statutory things that we have to do, along with what they want, the overall superpower of the North is trying to achieve. But I mean, it's very minor compared to what a fantastic thing that this has been put together. Thank you.
I'll go on to Heather.
Obviously, Chris, I mean, Yorkshire Dales are putting their points across, and I'm sure you've had dialogue, and they're all singing from the same hymn sheet in the sense. But we've got, obviously, they've got the coast as well, which is a bit different. I'm sure that, you know, the more the merrier, I mean, you know, you'll be sharing information presumably to make sure we get the same message across, which is great. And talking about the mayor, I've got to leave in about a quarter of an hour because I've got another meeting this afternoon where I'll meet the mayor. I've got to do a bit for North Yorkshire this afternoon, but I do get the opportunity to meet with him, and you know, he's been quite engaging, and I hope it continues to be like that. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Good to hear. I just wanted a little bit of a rant of my own, actually. Kind of linking in with what Jane says. I think it isn't our plan, but I do think we ought to try and build a little bit more on health, because it's a growth in, you know, it's one of the few places where there's still considerable ambition, and when you look at it, I mean, sort of health equals confidence, and confidence equals investment, investment equals growth. But you know, if you don't feel like it, if you're not up for it in yourself, you don't get up in the morning, do you? And so that's one way of looking at it. And the other way, I mean, health kind of saves us money, because, you know, health saves us a burden on the taxpayer, and it also, you know, creates more working hours. And so there's a holistic approach that's not new. I mean, you know, we've had mill villages, we have Rowntrees, Cadburys. The idea of taking a holistic approach to feeling well and being better. And so I do know that the mayor is quite receptive to this in the conversations that we had. And, you know, linked to the visitor economy, the things that we can do, it would just be great if the national park could be, you know, one of the epicentres where, you know, well-being and nature could come together. And I know you can't still get, it's difficult to get paid for it, but I just think understanding the value of that in a more holistic local context, and recognising that, you know, health is essential to growth and output. No harm in just saying it again. So I'll leave that with you. I feel better for getting it off my chest. The recommendation is on page 60 at 8.1. Are we happy to support that?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So on to 12. Actually, 12 is our corporate risk register. Back to Ian.
Thanks, Chair. Members, this is our annual paper to NPA asking you to comment and approve on the corporate risk register for the coming year. FRASC will then review our progress in managing those risks at each of its meetings during 25 and 26. As ever in putting together this corporate risk register, we've worked with colleagues from North Yorkshire Council's insurance and risk team. So for this year, there are no completely new risks, although we have amended one or two of them, and there are no deletions. Part 3 of the report details the risks and provides some commentary and the risk category level. And I'll just go through those very briefly. Finance now becomes our highest level risk, which hopefully won't be too much of a surprise in the light of our earlier discussion, and we've increased the risk category this year. Woodsmith and Bulby, that risk category stays where it is, and FRASC members may recall that we did increase that risk category mid-year following their various public announcements. The property and people capacity and skills risk remain unchanged, and current work is subject to papers elsewhere on this agenda. We've opted to increase the risk category for project management, and that reflects the growing importance that that externally funded projects will have on us being able to deliver all the work that we want to, again, particularly in light of what's happening in terms of our core grant. Information security was our highest level risk in the current year, but Simon and his team have done a lot of work on that, and we had an external audit at the end of last year, which we reported back to last FRASC. We had a very strong internal audit, and so we're significantly improved in that area. We're not complacent though, but we feel we can ease back on the risk category there. The risks around health and safety and breach of statutory duties are also unchanged, but in terms of health and safety, we've made a number of changes to risk mitigation. We've referenced some work we're doing to think through how we use the Met Office weather warnings, which are becoming more frequent as weather events become more intense. And so how we react to those as we invite the public onto our car parks and our visitor centres. So there's some thinking through about how we deal with that. And we're also developing some scenario plans for if there's a significant incident. And again, many of you will be familiar with the fatality on Carlton Bank in May last year. And while that wasn't on the public right of way and wasn't our issue, it was a timely warning that actually we ought to think through how we might respond if there was an incident of a similar nature on a public right of way. So there's some work we'll do there as well. The national parks target risk, we've reduced the risk category on that. We feel that's well managed. And we've changed the climate change. We've changed the title of the climate change risk to better reflect what we actually mean, which is the authority's net zero emissions target. So that's about stuff we can actually influence in terms of our operation. And that better reflects the work that we're actually doing. Now, the detail behind all those risks is in the appendices, as are all the risk mitigation factors. So I'll pause there, Chair, and we'll answer any questions.
Thanks, Ian. Questions on corporate risk register, Janet?
If you'll excuse me, it's not a question, Chairman. It's a comment just to say thanks very much. It's really easy to read, and it is understood through the previous conversations about why things have changed on the risk registers. So thank you very much.
Okay. An endorsement. Anybody else? No, are you happy then? Thank you, Ian, for your thorough presentation. Are members happy to approve the draft corporate risk register for 25-26? Having made some comments?
Yeah.
Thank you. So that one's done, Ian. It's on to health and safety.
Okay, thanks, Jim. And as with the previous paper, this is our annual report to NPA with FRASC reviewing health and safety every quarter. But we've previously agreed that it's important that at least once a year we provide a paper to the full authority. So the paper's largely self-explanatory, but I'll just pick out 1 or 2 points. At officer level, we continue to be very active in managing health and safety appropriately for the work that we do. We have a strong internal health and safety group, which is led by a director. That meets every couple of months. Our trade union, Unison, are part of that. And we also have a volunteer, obviously representing the safety interests of volunteers on this group as well. Part 5 of the report takes you through the sort of work that we get involved with during the course of the year. We have an annual health and safety programme that refreshes important skills and makes sure that our colleagues' safety tickets are up to date. We have a programme of safe driver training. Importantly, we do occupational health testing for those of our colleagues who are using noisy or vibrating machinery. They have at least annual checks through North Yorkshire Council's OC Health team. We get back written reports on each individual, and then for a number of them, there are a series of things that we need to put in place. Our ranger area managers this year have done some great work on distilling the CDM regulations into something that is usable and appropriate to the work that we do. And a task for the coming year will be to make sure we roll that out consistently across all our practical work areas. We continue to have a strong network of trained mental health first aiders internally, and there's some really good anecdotal evidence from staff about how conversations with those trained colleagues has really helped them, and in some cases sustained them at work when otherwise they might have been off sick. And you may recall I mentioned last year that there was a historical industrial injury claim against us and several of the individual's employers. We've spent quite a bit of time challenging that claim, and thankfully, because we can demonstrate how we manage health and safety, and we also we're able to produce the OC health testing from when the individual was working with us. That claim has now been withdrawn. Although I'm slightly irritated that the individuals who've withdrawn their claim, but we get no recompense for the time and effort that we've had to put into to rebut it. But anyway, that's life. We've had an external health and safety audit which was undertaken December, January, and into early Feb. And that was discussed at the Health and Safety Group last week. The concluding comments are in para 6.3, really positive stuff, and we'll be picking up on this at our SLT meeting tomorrow. So the NPA has developed a positive health and safety culture, continuously seeking improvement with concerted efforts at all levels. So that's all really good stuff. And the colleague from North Yorkshire Council who was doing this work on our behalf had free rein to talk to managers, our work colleagues who are undertaking practical work. He went out on volunteer work tasks and observed how we were setting up tasks, and certainly he came back and was really impressed with both our paid staff and our volunteers who are setting up practical work tasks, and the way they integrate volunteers into those tasks, make them interesting and enjoyable, but cater for the differing needs of individuals. So there's really strong stuff in there. There were a number of recommendations that came out from that report, and again, the Health and Safety Group have opted to agree with those and adopt those, and they'll form the basis of our health and safety action plan for the coming year. And so we'll come back to you at FRASC with regular updates on how we're progressing with that. So overall, in terms of our health and safety effort, I think we're in good shape. Although I say that with a note of caution, because this is one of those areas that if you don't keep working at it can go badly wrong all too quickly. So we'll need to continue working on it. But overall, I was really pleased with the outcome of that health and safety audit, and that you've got the full copy available if you want to read it through the link in the paper.
Heather?
Yeah, I just want to say what a great job you've done. I mean, you know, it speaks for itself, you and the team. I mean, it's very difficult. It's all right doing risk assessments. You've got volunteers, you've got jobs that suddenly come up that you've never done before. I think you're doing really, really well. I think you're doing extremely well. I think we're very grateful. I mean, and I will go back. Apart from that, as you know, when you're coming down for your public liability and employees liability insurance, they look at this. So they'll look at it and they'll no doubt put the premium up, but at least it's got to have a good reason. We're performing really well, and thank you very much. And I mean, obviously, it's an ongoing thing, as you say, looking for all this all the time. Big challenges, and I think this is one of the biggest nightmares for any employer, I think, is health and safety, and the more demands are on, whether it's occupational health or whatever. But I think, thank you very much, and I think you've done a great job. Thank you.
General concurrence with that. Anybody else? Jessica, it might be in the linking report, but have we had any near misses that you think members ought to have highlighted to them?
I mean, we pick those up in FRASC as we run Thank you, Keith. We picked those up in Frask as we run through the year. There were no really significant ones this year, although there were have been in previous years. We do get a good number of accidents reported, which the Health and Safety Group take a look at. But again, touch wood, nothing of any significance this year. And certainly we've been nowhere near having to report anything under the RIDOR regs or to Health and Safety exec.
It wasn't, I wasn't really thinking about the nearness of this. I was thinking about the implications of were it not a miss.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. Well, so the recommendation on page 83 is that members note the contents of this report, making any comments that they wish. Is that the appropriate thing to do, or should we endorse it? Or?
I think that's how we've taken it in previous years, Chair.
Okay. That's fair enough. So members will take the recommendation at 10 on page 83. All happy? Yeah. Thank you. Thanks again. So, back to Pete. It's the Treasury Management.
Everybody's annual favourite. So this one has been to Frask, and you'll be pleased to know it hasn't changed since Frask. So this one hasn't been impacted. In terms of just a couple of points on it, otherwise I'll take it as read. The report is half the length it was last year. You'll be pleased to know. It might not feel like it, but it's as low as I can get it while still covering all the statutory obligations that we have to. We set this every year at this time of year. We're mandated to set our Treasury management strategy ahead of the year, beginning in the same way as the budget. There's no major changes year on year, so it remains broadly the same. And a reminder to members that we invest with NYC under an agreement with them. So North Yorkshire Council invest our funds on a nightly basis. Therefore, we adopt their investment strategy. And we follow what is a low risk strategy, which is broadly the same for the public sector as a whole. In terms of a couple of things just to draw attention to, so up until the end of December 2024, the average investment rate was 5.23% on our cash. So that's been very good so far, and when we bring it in May at the end of the year around the amount of interest we've generated, that should put a large sum into reserves for that year. There's no major change in terms of prudential indicators, they remain the same ones as we used in previous years, and there's no assumptions of borrowing in year beyond the Danby Lodge lease, which is characterised as borrowing because of the length of it, which is the same as every year. Obviously, there may be a case later in the year around borrowing. If there is, we can bring this back and adjust the Treasury strategy, but it's based on our current budgeted position. The other thing to draw attention to is a useful table in there around projected future rates for the next few years, both on interest rates and PWLB borrowing rates. And as expected over the next few years, we're expecting that interest rate to reduce slowly, and equally PWA borrowing rates to reduce slowly as well. So it's worth making a note of those, that we're expecting sort of our investment returns to gradually tail off. But equally, future borrowing, if there were any requirement in sort of 3-4 years' time, we're expecting that rate to come down too. So I think they're the major points to draw. Otherwise, yeah, the policies remain broadly the same, and it's the same as went to Frask.
Thank you, Pete. Any questions for Pete on the Treasury Management? It looks comprehensive, isn't it? I say we've had the benefit of just looking at that. So, if there's no further comments, the recommendation on page 85 is 3 little parts. Approve the annual Treasury Management Strategy for 25-26 as detailed in Appendix B. Adopt the annual investment strategy agreed by the authority for 25-26, and approve the capital strategy as laid out in Appendix C. Are we happy to take those 3 recommendations?
Appreciate the half of the volume of last year.
Don't challenge him, Jenny.
Well, each year's half again next year.
I'll try.
No, it's well done. So, hang on, you've bamboozled me now, so I can't find the next page. 114 is the Chief Executive's. No. Oh, no. So it's an organisational development plan update. we come on to items for information. I never quite know why that is, but we'll take them as items to deal with.
I think it means I won't go on too long.
Okay.
Okay, but for me, this is a really important piece of work because this is all about how we manage our people and get the most out of them, and this runs alongside our business plans intended to aid delivery of that. And you approved our organisation development plan 2 years ago, and since then, I think I brought one update here and a couple of updates to FRASC. And at the halfway point in the plan, I just thought it was worth sharing with you some work that we've done over the last 12 months. I won't go through this in any detail because I think it's largely self-explanatory and it's all there for you. One item that I had to write this report before I got the outcome of our latest staff survey, which landed at the end of the week before last. So there's one or two headlines from that I'd like to share with you. We ran our first staff survey for about 5 years in 2023, and Tom is really keen that we repeat this regularly to get a temperature check of how our staff are feeling. So it's quite straightforward, 20 questions, an opportunity for narrative comments. We had a better response rate this year, so 76% of our staff return the survey, so that I think the outcomes from it are reliable. There were 108 narrative comments this year as opposed to 26 previously, so I'm still working my way through those. There's some really good stuff in there for us to analyse and take forward and build into an action plan. It's those narrative comments that I can really like. They add a bit more meat to the statistics. But again, we'll come back and report on these to FRASC in due course through the year. But particular statistical highlights for me, 90% of our staff would recommend the authority as a good place to work. Another 8% were neutral, so there's only 2% of our colleagues wouldn't recommend this as a great place to work, so that's a really good outcome. 95% of our staff said they understood our values and how they guide our work. Again, really strong, and most organisations would give their right arm for these sorts of numbers. And 87% of our staff said they had a high level of job satisfaction, and there were 9% neutral, and there's obviously a couple of 3 or 4% we caught on a bad day, but again, good numbers. And ace the other questions that we asked had a 80% or higher agreement rate, so covering areas like how we work with volunteers, clarity of direction that managers give, managers' communication with their teams, how useful the hub, which is our internal communication channel is, opportunity to be creative. There was lots of positive stuff about work-life balance and the mix of home working and site-based work, and also really strong agreement around the support we give for health and well-being. In amongst all that, there's some areas to improve, and some of the slightly poor, not poor schools, but poorer in our context, that we need to keep an eye on are sort of developing workload, which is something we talk about regularly at our SLT, and we talk each time we meet up with Unison. There's always something around communication, and could that be better? But I'm encouraged that some of the higher scoring questions were around clarity of communication, that managers are broadly doing a good job, but there's always more we can do around that. And just making sure we involve people in decision making. Again, I think we've continued to make big efforts to do that on things such as, we've talked a lot about office environment and working environment, but there may be other areas that we need to redouble our efforts in terms of involving colleagues on decision making, but we'll get into the detail of that as we go through the comments in detail. once I've managed to analyse all that, we'll share the outcome with staff and what we intend to do as a result of that. As I mentioned earlier, we'll come back to FAST later in the year and let you know how we're doing on that. But overall, I think we should be really content that our managers are doing a good job, and our people broadly are responding really well to the way in which they're being managed and doing a great job for us.
Thank you very much for that, and I think it is really important that we check in on the staff regularly, because we can always think we're doing a good job, and as you rightly say, we should never take anything for granted, and there's always room for improvement. Personally, disregarding that, I've had two big interactions in the last 6 months, one going on the national conference and two coming for the Christmas presentation. And I have to say, my personal opinion has been sort of that reflects the sort of feeling that I've been given in speaking to staff individually. And I therefore feel that one can feel that it reflects in both ways, if you see what I mean. But that's just a personal comment. But thank you.
I echo that, having been to the staff meeting, it's always a place where the chairman's liable to get him jobbing. And I got off quite lightly this time, but it just, like you said, I was just amazed and delighted at what a kind of diverse range of people our staff are, and yet when you talk to them about the job, they're absolutely honed in, which I thought was really impressive. So well done. Recommendation is that we note the report. How do we do that? Okay. I know Janet needs to leave us for the bus soon, but just when you're ready, Janet. Yeah. So now then, have I got to the Chief Executive's report? And item 16 is there for your information, it says, but I don't know if it's your opportunity to ask questions of Tom as to what he's up to or what he's not up to. And I'll go to Tom then and just ask you if there's anything you'd like to particularly bring to our attention.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chair. I mean, I'll take most of it as read, but very happily answer any questions. Clearly, the financial position has dominated an awful lot of my time over the course of the last 2 to 3 weeks. The one thing I perhaps would just draw out is under paragraph 3.5. We had a lively discussion at briefing. It's fair to say around community engagement, and something that the authority puts a significant amount of store by in the sense of delivering really good customer service, but also recognising we work with and deliver through our communities. One of the ways in which we communicate with our communities is through the parish forums. I think we as officers have reached a view that the current format of those parish forums isn't sustainable. There are aspects of it that do work well, particularly the joint forum that meets once a year. But a number of the forums over a period of time have been quite poorly attended, and it's something that we want to invite the parish councils and parish forum members to give us some input into how we can improve the way that we work in terms of community engagement going forward. And so there'll be hopefully a short discussion paper to bring to the parish forums that are coming up in April, just to kind of set that out and invite input from parish councils about how we do a better job going forward.
Members, Patrick, welcome.
Very quickly, thank you, Tom. Just in the light of this week's announcement that the SFI has stopped welcoming any more applications, FIPL is becoming increasingly important. I know it's a 1-year agreement. Is there any indication, I suspect there isn't, but that it might go on beyond that, or when might we know if it would be extended? Because it is such good news.
I mean, for answer to the first question, no, not at this stage. But I think we live in hope. I mean, clearly the grant funding element of it is lower than last year. When would we, if it were to be extended, when would we find out? Well, this year we had early indications just before Christmas, but not the kind of final public confirmation until February. So it doesn't give an awful lot of time in terms of forward planning. But hopefully, if there were to be a longer term commitment, we get that sooner from government. I think just in relation to SFI, myself and Rebecca were talking about this. Our agriculture land management had a farming and land management on Friday. We know that there were a number across the national park, a number of farmers whose applications were about to go live, and the impact on them and the advisors who supported them in those applications is just earth-shattering. Not to mention the fact that a place like the North York Moors, when you probably have a greater proportion of what we call harder to reach farmers who probably haven't entered into SFI more broadly, but need to do as the D-Link payments come to an end in the next 2 years, is pretty catastrophic. I mean, there is a question about the extent to which FIPL can help. I mean, it's not a big amount of funding, and the amount of revenue funding that you can do through FIPL is relatively limited as well. But certainly, it's an area where I think, from an officer point of view, we're mindful that we might get a couple more applications coming through from farmers who haven't previously engaged with the scheme, partly because of the dynamics in relation to SFI. And clearly, picking up a conversation earlier, the more we can harness and engage more farmers, full-time working farmers, through projects like FIPL, the better, I think, longer term.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, I think it's the unfairness of the situation that we have on individuals that seems to be the worst impact. You know, some have done fine, some have missed everything, and that can't be right. Okay, Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks. Just a comment about sort of forum, as you would expect from me. I mean, clearly we need to do some. We've been talking about how the forums are operating for quite a while over the last couple of years, and as you say, Tom, the amount of staff resource that goes into it is ridiculous if you're only having 1 or 2 people from the public attending, and we've got to look at why that is and what we do about it. From my experience in the Western Forum, we over the years we've developed a fairly steady group of people that not only appreciate the presentations, but they enjoy the discussion as well. I don't know what the answer is, and I think it's quite right that we need to do, as you say, Tom, we need to look at it and see what the way forward is, and so we'll see where we get to with all of that.
Anybody else? Actually, I must say, I know we had to talk about briefing, and I think the way Tom's described the approach now, it sounds fine, actually. My slight concern as one of our parish members these days is that I wouldn't want to go to the parish forum and the first thing they know is that we've said this isn't working, we've stopped it, like an SFI sort of thing. But I think it's absolutely right to say, look, you know, you look at the amount of officers and the input that's coming into this as opposed to the interaction that they're getting, it is not sustainable. And I think, you know, to start from that point and say, how can we make this sustainable is fine. I do think our parish forums actually do play into our governance as well as our community engagement. And you know, the fact that we have a level of parish governance, although all our members are appointed as opposed to elected, and we've had our issues about that in the past, our members still pretty accurately reflect the electoral dynamic of their patches. There's hardly any members who are here who don't speak and work with people who, in a slightly different format, you know, elect them or not is the case. And so I don't think, although technically you can say they're appointed, not elected, I think having that closeness of relations for our board, you know, is important. That's what we're here for, to be honest. And so if we have a parish level of governance, and then that plays into our forums, which plays into our selection process, which gives our parish councils a sort of legitimate leverage into the governance of the authority, and I think that's different from just talking to Joe Public, in which case there's quite a danger that you hear nothing until something goes wrong, and then you hear everything. But I take the point that it's not working, and how we would go forward in maintaining our parish governance relationship with our parish councils without those forums and their lead members on the authority would be another question. But I do think personally that there's a point about maintaining our governance structure as well as engaging the public. Hopefully we can do both, but in the absence of any other, I mean, I think we should go into the next round of parish forums, notifying them that we can't keep going like this. Here's your chance to speak differently. And in the members' training working group, I had a chat with, so there's just 2 or 3 of us that do that. And it doesn't really have a constitution, it's just to have a look at the training day programme that's in the agenda, and for 2 or 3 members to help Judith and the officers make sure that we think we're getting the best interface, the best fit for what members want in that. And so I wouldn't want to sort of the members' training working party to end up having minutes and reporting back and being a body in itself. But we had a look at that there as well, and see how we had some conversation. I think without saying more, let's ask our parish forums what they value and what they're going to do about it. Yeah, I think without further ado, that would be my feeling on that. Any further comments on Chief Executive's report? The iPad's gone to sleep. In that case, we shall move on. Thank you, Tom. To feedback from lead members on the committees and forums. And so, in order, I've got Conservation and Climate Change Forum. Oh, do you want to? Sorry,
if you don't mind, thank you, members. I do have to go very shortly. Thanks. I think the Recreation and Wellbeing Forum met, and the main topics we've covered today again actually are, we had a very, very detailed presentation on both Danby Lodge and the Sutton Bank Visitor Centre, and some of the successes, lots of successes, the fact that those centres are going to celebrate 50 years next year, so we're looking forward to great things there. But most importantly, that's coming through all the time, it's about really getting the retail strategy right, and that's one of the things that came through. All the notes will be on members' SharePoint. We also looked at the public rights of way prioritisation, and again making sure that any consultation on prioritisation of the public rights of way goes to the parishes, because it's really, really important that the people that know locally those areas. So that's something else there. And we had feedback from, we've spoken about it earlier today, which is the targeted transport and work that will come back to us in round about September. I'm looking to Joel as my link person here. I think those are the main areas, Joel, aren't they, that we covered? And the presentations were thorough and really enjoyable, which isn't often we get to say this about all the meetings we attended. Very enjoyable, and thanks to members who've attended. And with that, Chair, if you will please excuse me, I will go, and thank you all. Thank you for a good meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Janet, and yeah, safe journey. So back to Conservation and Climate Change Forum on 27th of January. Do you want to say anything on that, Patrick?
Briefly, Chairman, we had quite a sobering morning at the end of January, talking about climate adaptation and the climate action plan. Climate adaptation and future land use in the North York Moors sounds quite dry, but actually it's a big report that the park has commissioned. We were presented, the authorities commissioned the University of Leeds to write this report. I'll give you its full title.
Land use resilience in the North York Moors, an assessment of likely impact of climate change over the next 50 years. It's a 150-page document. It was introduced to us, so none of us had read it. We have now received it, and we're going to have the forum is going to meet next week to discuss this report, and then Professor Steve Carter of the University of Leeds is coming back at our next forum meeting in April, where we're going to ask further questions. But it's quite a sobering document about what might happen in the national park over the next 50 years. There are some interesting, challenging illustrations of what might happen in the future. Those are the things I'd recommend members having a look at. But we'll come back, I think, to this meeting with further updates on the outcome of this document. Is that fair to say? I think that's right. And that was the first half of the meeting. The second half was a very good presentation from Tom Stevenson, who is our Head of Climate Change and Carbon Reduction Officer, and about the National Park's climate action plan that we're producing, effectively a roadmap towards how we achieve net zero by 2050. We got an update on that, and that was an interesting debate, and that's going to come back to the forum in January. We meet again on the 22nd of April. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So next week's extra forum, that's a week today.
That's right.
12 o'clock, yeah. Presumably, have all forum members received the invite? Yeah, I mean, I saw an email that didn't have all the forum members on it.
All the forum members, it's you, Malcolm, Patrick, Christine.
I think you should be.
No, I think.
I think it was for the whole forum to be invited to debate the report. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think the forum can be half invited, can it?
No.
No, it should be the whole forum. So
Brian.
Oh, come on, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection was that there was going to be a smaller group meeting next week to chat through some of the wording in the report, and then the full forum was going to get together on the 22nd of April to look through the report again. But if you want, I mean, happy for the whole forum to come along, but the discussion we had at the meeting was that there would be a smaller group to look at that.
Brian, forgive my apologies, I hadn't appreciated that. I think it would be better if the whole forum was invited. So if next Monday doesn't work for everyone, then we'll find another date. But it needs to be before April, before our next meeting.
Sure, no, I think it's your call, Patrick, but I think clearly, if the forum looks at something, it has to at least all have that information. I don't think there's a week between now and Monday, isn't there? So that's appropriate notice for people. I mean, if someone else was desperate to go, of course they can go by invitation. But I don't think there'll be time to delay. I think you just have to take that process as it is. And there's an opportunity for people to, but just to make sure that it should be, in my view, the members of the forum whose interest and duty it is to look closely at these things.
Just a quick one. What time was that meeting meant to be?
I think it's at midday. 12 o'clock. Yeah.
We've got planning briefing. Yeah, so it'll be after planning briefing for some.
You can do planning chair's briefing here.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, members. John.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly to follow on what Patrick and Bryony were saying. I was at the Conservation and Climate Change Forum on 27th of January, and I was struck by the seriousness of the report that Professor Carver gave from Leeds University. And as you say, he was predicting the effect of climate change on the park's environment over the next 50 years. And it was serious stuff, And I'm actually on Wrekin and Cleveland Council's Climate and Environment Scrutiny Committee. and I reported this Leeds University work back to that committee, and I've been working with Bryony to offer a summary to Wrexham and Cleveland Climate Committee, and to consider how the council's climate campaign can respond to that. Thank you.
And back to the consultant's question, there's no definitive answer, no definitive way, is there? We have to look at what we find and see what we think of it. So, on then to FASC. Colin's done a report there. Do you want to add to that, Colin?
Just one point really, that Farvies Bazaars that were doing their first audit for us, they were very complimentary, as I've put in here, that and how busy our staff were, that they helped them so much to be able to get the audit done and completed on time. And they thanked our staff, and we thanked our staff very much for all the hard work that they put in. And they said next year it maybe wouldn't take them as long when they knew actually what was going on now. So, but they're still going to put price up anyway. So, but that's something we have to put up with. But I'll just take it as read, Chair.
So, thanks, Colin, and thanks for putting in such a good report. Tom thought Peter did it for you, so that's a compliment. On to sorry. Oh, sorry. The iPads. So on to the notes of the EDI group. Did you want to say something on that, John?
Well, to continue the theme, I mean, unfortunately, because we all have such incredibly overloaded diaries, Arnold has had to make apologies for the last couple of meetings. But as you just said, it's worth noting that all the notes are on our SharePoint scheme, and it's worth having a read of these notes. The last couple of meetings have been really engaging. We've had a presentation from an organisation called Soil Collective and Landscapes for Everybody. And I think, I'm sure that's been, we've all seen this presentation. Was it a training day, or I'm sure it's been, I'm sure most of us have seen that presentation, but it was really engaging. They have the 10 principles of engaging with people, making sure that national parks are places for everybody. And given that the priority we place on contributing to a healthy population and the benefits that the physical benefits that visiting the national park have, it's important that we do all we can to engage in programs like this. I'm really pleased that although the focus of the work of community work that we do it might be seen as focusing on the larger urban conurbation areas of Middlesbrough, and rightly so. The work, it isn't just like that. We engage with everyone. And it's pleased to see that we're developing relations with community groups in Scarborough about improving access to Raincliffe Woods, David, in one of the places. The presentations that we've had recently have been really engaging. So I encourage you to have a look at those now. Joel, what am I missing out on here?
It's a very good summary, John. So at the meeting we had last week, again, taking up that theme, we had a presentation around the Mosaic project, which is about championing national parks for everyone. So that's in addition to the Soil Collective work. And in a way that was setting it up for the work that's going to be done this year. And there will be a members training day later in the year, I think about October, where we'll be going to Middlesbrough to actually engage with some of the communities which the community champions that are being developed through Mosaic will be connecting with. So you'll have members will have an opportunity to engage with that project. We also had a review of the Generation Green Mark II work, which was funded directly by DEFRA. It was a one-year fund about creating opportunities for access for young people, ostensibly to spend time both in terms of during the day, but also overnight, residentials as well, within various settings within protected landscapes, so farm visits and the traditional kind of residential experiences as part of that. So we reviewed the impact of that, and in particular looking at some of the positives which come out from any programme that's only going to last a year. And unfortunately, the government have confirmed that there won't be any future funding of this, which we'd always suspected. So the way that had been delivered was set up so that we could take as much from that as possible in terms of connections, relationships, in particular with some of our wider providers like East Barnby Centre, also at Carlton, the Adventure Centre there, which of course has had a challenging year. So we had some good review about the impact of that. And then the final thing that we looked at was around, there's a stream of work which one of the EDI group members really champions around changing places facilities, and the work being done in particular to develop a programme in Helmsley where we could install one at the Cleveland Way car park. But also I was able to inform the group that we've been able to find the money to install a changing places facility at Danby Lodge, and that will be opening in time for the Easter period. So that's good progress as well on that work stream, which really does have a lot of momentum behind it. That was it.
Thanks, Joel. Thank you, John. Any questions for Joel or John? It's really nice to have you pointing us to the good things in person. I know notes are notes, but it's really useful to have a bit of a plug of the things that are important from the chair as well. Okay. At 5, the notes of the local access forum meeting on the 3rd of December. On the SharePoint, David Hughes's not here. I don't think there's a substitute, is there? So you'll have to take those from the SharePoint. There's just one thing. The first 2 items that I forgot to raise it. I just wanted to touch on arrangements for co-opting our young people to our conservation and recreation forums, and just ahead of June, we do have a co-opting to conservation forum, but it hasn't worked very well for reasons that are not exactly clear. And although we're trying hard with Youth Voice, we haven't managed to actually get an individual for Recreation and Wellbeing Forum. So although those things seem really positive, we'll be coming to the end of the year. And forgive me, as Tom says, skin in the game, my hands are about skinned from trying to get this going. And it's disappointing to me that we haven't managed to get it going. So I was just wondering, the appointment, Luke's appointment to the climate conservation I think it would be until July or something, so that comes to the AGM. But we still haven't got someone. It would have been nice to have that up and running so we could evaluate it rather than. Do you think that maybe we should try advertising more widely, or to get someone interested in being co-opted to the Recreation and Wellbeing Forum? I know it's a debate we had at the time, and Youth Voice said that they were going to find people from amongst our number, but hasn't happened. So I'm not sure. I think we might have we might have the mandate to be able to do that or not. I don't know. But, it's you know, we could have done that between now and June, and at least got started. Forgive me for springing it on you, Malcolm.
I mean, as you say, Jim, it just hasn't worked out. But it's something we need to do for all the reasons that we wanted to do this in the first place. So we've got to try something different, I think, so that we are in a position to hopefully attract somebody. I mean, if anybody, I think I'm happy to leave the officers to think about it a bit more and come back to you with what's the best way to do it. It seems to me that some sort of broader, spread the net wider is the obvious thing to do. Yeah. I can't suggest any.
I mean, it just
think about that.
Yeah, we can't evaluate it if we haven't got started, can we? So I think we really need to try and find someone, and we will understand from Luke.
I mean, the reason we're doing it is all about having some young person influencing what we're doing. We know the benefits of all the young members of staff, the benefits they bring, and this is just a continuation of that, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, since we've done that, and sometime out, the Dales have gone through a process. They've actually done the recruitment process. But I think that for us, we've agreed an appointments process, which is absolutely fine, and the sort of basic letter of approval and a bit of an appraisal process to make sure that we feel they're appropriate and we understand the way it works. So I think that's fine. It's just trying to find someone who's just keen and prepared to have a go. Go on, Patrick.
Just quickly a practical observation, because I think it's excellent aspiration. Luke has, I don't think, attended a meeting yet. And one practical observation is that the meetings are between 10 and 12 on a Monday morning, or whatever it is. And if you are a young person, you're probably either working or still at college or something. It's quite hard to do that. I just wonder whether the meeting should be 4 till 6 or a bit of an easier time. Just a practical point.
I mean, look, I think it's a really, really important point. We don't make it easy for people by kind of sticking to this rote approach that we have to hold meetings during the day. I mean, it works for us as officers, but certainly I think we need to think about whether we can be a bit more innovative. So I think, Patrick, that's encouraging. My suspicion is I know Luke took on a new job not long after he graduated back in September. So I think that's made his participation difficult. I did. I think I will go away and check the resolution we agreed last year about whether we can move ahead and look to advertise for Rec and Wellbeing Forum. I did intend to try and bring a short paper to NYMNPA just to kind of review how things have been going. I think clearly, as I say, Chair, it's not been working as well as we'd intended, but also perhaps just reflecting a little bit as well on the experience so far of those national parks that have gone down the co-option route. The South Downs probably been a pathfinder in that, and then latterly the Yorkshire Dales have been a bit more expansive than we've been in terms of in effect co-opting members who attend a number of their committees, including the National Park Authority, but as an observer only, which is permissible. So there might be something more broadly there as well that we should reflect on.
Okay, but I just think, the same path. Actually, the South End started this. We've been on this for only a short time after. It's just we've really struggled through various mishaps to get it up and running. I think the proposal that we have would be, given the time commitment arrangements, but I think the interface that people would get from being a part of our forums would actually be much more interesting to young people than it would sort of crunching numbers in the financial management review, So I think it's actually just the right place to get them engaged, and I think that members of the forums would really enjoy hearing from them and getting their perspective. So I don't think we're late in the game. We've got the space, we just haven't filled it. And I would quite like to see if what we've put in place works before trying to change it. So can we just park that as a conversation? We'll have a look at the mandates we've got. See if something can be done before June. Okay. So on to reports from members and outside bodies, and we have Colin from the trust.
Yes, Chair. We just met last week, last Thursday. We had Tom was chairing from on Teams on screen. That we had a good meeting. We had a big debate about safeguarding children policy, which we took on eventually that we'd go to the NSPCC for a draft policy so that the trust was fully covered. We hadn't missed anything out. This was going to cost us just over £2,000 anyway, but we thought that was money well spent. Just going on to before Christmas, I think it was before Christmas, they planted 100 native trees on Levisham Brow. They were sold to different people just as a part of a woodland management rather than each individual tree per person. But that brought us in about £3,000. We had a good day on the 4th of March when the Rounton's Coffee Group came to the whole of Horkham to plant fruit trees. It was a good day. When by the time we walked right down to the building in the bottom there, you know, I did need the helicopter to get me back out again, to be fair, but you know, it wasn't forthcoming. So, but they were well. They enjoyed the day and said they would like us to go back and see them at Northallerton, where to the Rounton's coffee plant. Moving on, there is other projects that have been applied for that's not actually approved as yet. And the Stepping Stones project that they have, where a guy goes into school at Middlesbrough, Cleveland area. We said that we'd fund that going forward, and if money came in to be available to fund it, this was going to cost us £10,000 up front, but if there was money available to come to the project, then that would cover it going forward. So good day, but that was us. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Colin. So on CNP, David's put a report of the appendix.
Yeah, I believe you answered it.
Okay, thanks for that, David. Thank you for that. The housing board is still in a coma. We're not quite sure what's going to happen there. So we shall await to hear. I think that's it. I think the recommendation is that the report's been noted. So, moving on then to item 19's on the record. And Malcolm was just going to give it as a bit of an update on the members' appraisal or member development process.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Not the best of times to summarise the discussions that we've been having, but I'll keep it fairly brief for obvious reasons. It is. Yeah. Can you hear me? I'll be close. All right. Yeah, I mean, first of all, just thanks for taking part. I hope that you know, the one-to-one discussions that you've had with myself, Jim, Colin and Clive, you found useful. Since then, obviously, the four of us have got together to compare notes, not about individuals, but about the general topics that were coming out that I'll summarise. And we've had a bit of a chat with Tom just to explain to him some of the main good things and things that should go better, as it were, that we'll get on to. You remember that there's kind of 5 general questions, so I'll just take those basically in turn. I mean, the first one was about what's your individual contribution. I mean, the sorts of comments there were about the meetings you did or sometimes didn't attend and regretted you didn't attend or whatever, the expertise that different members bring. And also just about how, you know, your role in the authority. So that was fairly straightforward, but a useful sort of introduction, I always find. What has gone well? Kind of 3 elements to this. One was, how do we get on as members? And I think the general view is that, you know, as a team, we do fairly well. We get on fairly well, particularly, and the thing that's I always find interesting is that there's a general view that we can disagree respectfully. Yeah. In planning committee, you can say what you want. You can disagree with somebody that's just said something, and there's no personal animosity about it. And I think that's really important. And we support each other. We've got different expertise around the table. The second bit of it is obviously member-officer relationships, which are excellent. I mean, you know, we've seen today, you see at all the meetings, the enthusiasm that officers bring to their job. We know from what Ian was saying how much they enjoy working here, and that's just apparent. And we're very grateful for the sort of support that they give us. So lots of good things you can feed back to your members of staff. I mean, it's very much appreciated by us. And clearly, without going into lots of detail, you can see from the work programme that we talked about earlier, just the range of things that are carried out to a very excellent quality. So they're all things to be positive about. What could have gone better? It's interesting. The first thing I had down here was we as members could be better critical friends. It's the word it was put to us when the four of us talked. And I think earlier on in this meeting, there was a pretty good example of that all the way through, to be honest. But the serious point there is that, you know, part of our role is scrutiny. And I think we have got better at that, and we still will continue to get better at that. And we need to be thinking about that. I think as well, because there's so much going on, there is a feeling among some members, and I think particularly the newer members, that there's a tendency to get a bit overwhelmed by things, or to think that I don't know something, I need to know more about these sorts of things. And that's not a new thing. That sort of crops up quite often in these sort of surveys. And it's difficult to know the line between how much information should we be told and to what extent should we ask. And maybe there's a number of ways, I think, through that. But I think remember that there are many opportunities for us to ask questions, not only in the meetings themselves, but outside the meetings. You know, there's the monthly update that we have. In addition to that, though, that there was a feeling that, I mean, one of the good things was that we enjoy getting out and about, and we enjoy the sort of the meeting that we had at Dolby, where we had a discussion on strategy and got together and sat around tables and discussed things, but we don't do that very often. And I think the training discussion that happened fairly recently was aware very much of that. And the future programme may move us a bit more in that direction. Other sort of topics, and again, actually we picked up on this at the Dolby discussion, was about short-term contracts. And we certainly have moved forward in, and I think Revitalize is an excellent example where something finishes, but we managed to slot a lot of the staff into new jobs that are being created by new projects. And it was just the feeling that we need to support staff in that way, and there may be further further things we can do to help them in that way. The point we've touched on today is engagement with local communities. It's not just the forum in this case, which is one thing, but it is also the communication strategy. How are we communicating with the local people and those that live outside? And also, educational school children were mentioned. And again, both the people that live here and the people that are outside, and what's the balance that we need to do there. Another topic that we've already talked about and that we know that work in hand is the issue of volunteers. I remember Ian explaining to us that it's not just us that are having challenges about the volunteers, it's just a general thing, but they were the sorts of topics that people mentioned. In terms of training needs, this isn't the individual's needs, this is in general. And it was about this sort of sharing information. And as I say, maybe getting out a little bit more. The sorts of topics in terms of what people would like to know more about. Again, touched on today in terms of farming, all the farming issues. Those of us that are non-farmers sometimes wonder the language that's been talked about. But it's a real challenge, as we all know. Health and well-being is something we talk about quite a lot, but it's a very difficult nut to crack, as Jim was explaining earlier as well, I think. And biodiversity, we've had some excellent presentations about biodiversity, but it's a really complex matter. And your reference to this big report about what are things going to be like in the future, there's all sorts of different scenarios about this. Difficult to pick all of that up, I think. The other thing that obviously we're going to be getting into, which is new to a number of members, is the local plan. I think some of you still have difficulty to some extent in seeing how it all fits together, and now it's all going to change. Or not all. Some of it is going to change, I should say. It's a review, isn't it, Chris? We're not starting from square one again. So that's going to be quite a learning process for all of them. I think in terms of next steps, as I say, we've had an initial discussion with Tom. Part of it is very much down to yourselves. It's kind of each of us individually doing the sorts of things I've just been talking about. But also, I mean, any feedback you want to give to me, Jim, Colin or Clive, if I've missed anything out, and you can do it now to some extent. But there are opportunities to raise some of these issues, as we have done today, and do it more, I would suspect. And that's how we kind of take this forward. It's down to us to implement the things that we've been talking about. So basically, just thanks again for taking part in it. Happy to answer any questions now if you want, but I think it's something we need to come back to generally in all the various formal and informal meetings that we're involved in.
Thanks, Malcolm. Any questions for Malcolm? I think I mean, a bit like the staff survey. It's important we do it, and it's done. So, no further updates then. Good. It's the member training development group. So I kind of went off on this before because I'd forgotten it was on the next page, but the minutes of it are there. And basically, what the group did was discuss the subjects and the meeting appointments on the next page, and I think we really felt not having too many meetings. We thought that when we do pull this out in person, better still if we can be out and about and look at something, as opposed to sort of sat in the committee room being talked at. I don't mean that wrongly, but we get. It seems that members get a lot of benefit from being out and about in an informal session, and also that all-day sessions are difficult for many, if not most, members. And to be honest, chunking it up into half-day sessions seemed to be a much better way of making it work for members. So those are the comments from that, really. I think minutes of that. Anything else? Recommendations that members note the report. There's the agenda for meetings, and I think that brings me to such other business. So, and there is one matter of other business, because I think although he's not leaving us immediately and finally, I think this is Ian's last NPA meeting and I think we've managed to twist his arm just to give us a little bit of handover, but I think it would be appropriate at this time to thank Ian for his fantastic contribution that he's given. And what I would say, in adding to that in a personal level, because in the work that you do as chair and the chief executive and Tom are great supports, and I don't have to do too much really, but if all of a sudden they get out of the frame for some reason, then either because they've retired or because there's a problem or whatever, then the stuff really hits the fan, and all of a sudden you've got to step up and kind of make it work in that absence. And a couple of times, at least, Ian's been just fantastic to me in doing that, and together we've had to step up and basically fill the gap and make stuff happen. So a special personal thank you to Ian, as well as the corporate one, and I hope that your future plans go well for you. You may seem about, but I think this is your last meeting, isn't it?
While I was doing my prep last night, my wife said, "So what have you been to since 2000?" And I kind of
Well, I said, well, the good news is we won't have to listen to him anymore. I wanted to keep it positive. Okay. Well, yeah, thanks very much, Ian. Thank you for that. And without further ado, I shall bring the meeting to a close. Thanks for your attendance, and hopefully there's some sandwiches.